507.
What is going on, everyone? Today we have a very special stream. I'm very excited for it. Today, let's see if this works. We'll be switching from our standard chat along the bottom to chat along the right-hand side. Or no, the right-hand side. This side. So hopefully it'll appear. Thank you so much for joining. Darbley, I'll get to your question about what denomination of Christianity I'm part of. I'm sure we'll get into all that when we bring on our guest. It looks like we have an ad break coming up, so maybe we'll wait for that. But thank you guys so much for being here. Hello, Mick Wheel. Good to see you. Even though you have to go to bed soon, I appreciate that you are here, even though you have to go to bed soon. Yeah, the goal here is just to kind of chat with other guests I'll be introducing you to here in a bit, and yeah, it should be good. For now, I think I'll restore the bottom chat, and then I'll just switch when it seems appropriate later on. So we'll run an ad, and then we'll get into things. It's funny, when I run ads, I never know like if I should take a break for those that aren't subscribers, or if I should utilize that time. Also, Esther, thank you so much for the resub at 48 months. Also, I gotta give Esther a quick shout out because that new Captain Falcon salute emote is something that she made for me with that little animation glint. It's excellent. So anyway, with that, I think we got an ad or so running. So I think now I'll switch it over to the mainstream, and we'll introduce our guest at that time. So let's do that. Hello, Drew. How's it going?
Hey, it's going really well. How's it going with you, David?
Going very well. Thank you so much for taking some time to speak with me. And if you'd like, go ahead and give an intro, and so that chat knows who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Drew. My tag is the Unable Table, all lowercase, no space. Basically, I've been playing Smash a long time now. I'm a boomer. Sort of shockingly, everyone becomes one if they stick around long enough. I started in 2009 when I was 14 playing Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Big Meta Knight main in SoCal. Love Meta Knight. Lots of fun. Eventually, everyone quit that game for PM or Melee, and then eventually Smash 4. I went the Melee route, so I started playing Melee around the end of 2013, maybe 2014. Eventually, I moved to Northern California to go to school at Berkeley to study pure math. I got a bachelor's in pure math with the intentions to be a mathematician. ultimately I ended up right now I'm director of a math tutoring center, um, which I don't know if we'll get into very much, but I'd say it informs a lot of my conversations here. Um, well, we'll get into my personal philosophies, but I'm a NorCal Jigglypuff main. I was ranked in NorCal. I'm a bit of a, you might call me a hidden boss now. I don't go to tournaments that much, um, but I'm still pretty damn fast and pretty good, pretty shockingly good. People are usually pretty surprised. Um, um, that's that's where I'm at on Melee. In terms of my philosophy, just so everyone kind of knows, I've got kind of a really weird background. I was homeschooled growing up. I was unschooled, which is a controversial and radical form of homeschooling in which you don't teach your kids anything. So I've always been kind of outside of whatever groups I've ever been a part of. I've never really felt the same as anyone who I'm with. I've always kind of have a different perspective. I was raised as an atheist. I still am definitely an atheist. uh, and But I was raised in a rural kind of Christian town, so a lot of my friends were Christians, and uh, um, I would say there were definitely times where I felt kind of, well, because everyone else was Christian, there were times where I was either implicitly or sometimes explicitly kind of left out because of that. Yeah, I was very into atheism. Like when I say I was raised as an atheist, I mean like my parents took me to uh, atheist conventions when I was 12 and 13. I would go and listen to Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris talk. I would go and listen to talks at Caltech about evolution and stuff. So like atheist. Some of these people, the Skeptic Society, were very prominent in the early 2000s on religious liberty. There would always be these atheists who had their religious liberty kind of violated, and then they would sue whoever did it, whether it was the government or whoever. And so a lot of it was about that. And I'm hoping to maybe discuss some of this later. I think that that's kind of relevant here. I think um, in terms of this conversation, I'm kind of I'm pretty exhausted because I'm trying to figure out exactly how we save the Super Smash Brothers community from hating themselves.
Now that's pretty dramatic, Drew. That's pretty
Yeah,
dramatic.
yeah. Yeah, it feels dramatic. So in preparation for this conversation, I went out and I bought a Bible. I picked out. So I've had a Bible before. It was a Gideon's Bible that I got at a hotel. It was a King James Bible, but from David's recommendation, I got the English Standard Version.
Good
One thing I
choice.
didn't mention that I just feel like I should mention is David is the name of my father. My dad's name is David,
Nice.
so there's some undeniable sense in which I can't help but view you in the same category of all the other important Davids in my life.
That is quite an advantage, depending on how you view authority and father figures.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, um, yeah, so I went and got a Bible. My experience with Christianity is mostly hearing about it from Christians, and then I've read most of the Old Testament. So I've definitely read Genesis back to front, a lot of Exodus. I listened to a long lecture series on the Old Testament by notorious rambler and controversial political figure Jordan Peterson.
I was wondering if you were going to say that. He has a great
Yeah,
series on those.
yeah, so that series actually, yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I think as much as there's plenty of things I don't care for with Jordan Peterson politically, as he's clearly a brilliant professor, he's a classic professor, rambler type. That's the kind of person I am. You'll find I'm the kind of guy who just wants to go and ramble about all sorts of whatever crazy ideas I have about whatever.
Right.
Um, I have a big uh, trust and care for people who really sit and think about things on their own and come up with their own wacky interpretations of things. And anyways, yeah. So the Old Testament I do have some familiarity with, but this was my first time really sitting down with the New Testament, and I've had 2 days, so I haven't gotten through that much. I tried to read the entire book of John. I didn't succeed. I didn't have time. But I did. I read as much as I could, and then I kind of watched a summary of the rest of the stories.
Great. Much respect.
I thought maybe we could just talk about um I thought maybe at first we could just like talk about scripture.
Sure.
I definitely I had some notes, I had some questions, and eventually we'll just get into more broad stuff.
Great. That sounds perfect. And thank you for your intro.
Yeah.
I want to make a few acknowledgments in the chat to Major Guile, to McWheel, to Christy, and to Ryan, of course. Thank you guys so much for being here. This is certainly different from what we normally do, but I saw Drew speak his mind a few times, and I thought, well, here's a thinker that I'd love to just kind of pick his brain a little bit. And Drew was certainly interested in Christianity, so it seems like a good fit. So I appreciate you guys, and Real Smith, all you guys. I appreciate you guys being here for this discussion.
Oh, Smith is one of mine. He's here for me.
Oh, awesome. Hey, nice to meet you.
Yeah, so hey, Smith. I'll be talking to him tomorrow about some other stuff. He's an interesting guy. He's an artist.
Thanks for the follow.
Um, so yeah, I actually really enjoyed reading it a
Hmm.
lot more than I expected. Uh so my understanding is there's four gospels. These are four stories that basically tell the life of Jesus from something like four perspectives,
Yeah,
all written at kind of different times. That's something I kind of want to talk about. It's one of the things that unnerves me about Christianity. But I think John I've heard about the most. I think it's maybe the most famous, or maybe the most like, I don't know. I think when you're Christian, you're not supposed to like make tier lists of the different books, but from the outside looking in, it seems like the Book of John is like the S tier book. um so yeah, forgive me for Smash Bros braining it, but
oh, you have to
um
sometimes.
yeah. Uh so I found it it's shockingly poetic. It's like very, very poetic and pretty interesting the way it's read. I thought I could get through it in 2 days. As soon as I started reading it, it like very clearly begs you to pretty closely read it and really in the Bible, they do a lot of just like they'll say so and so was from somewhere, and they do this and do that, and you can kind of blaze through without really understanding what the hell is happening. So you really have to read it very carefully and slowly to understand um, the uh, the
The
significance.
nuances, right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. What I'll say is I've closely read the first about 8 chapters. So I understand this is about, Jesus has these different miracles he does. It roughly corresponds to those, except for the Big Bang miracle at the end, the big one. Um, one of the things I wanted to talk about, just kind of starting it out, it actually has a really beautiful beginning. This, um, okay, I'm gonna be coming at this as an atheist, reading it as, for me, it's kind of like reading literature. Like I'm reading literature. I'm just gonna have my own kind of reading of how I would take this, maybe with a modern, scientific perspective.
Sure.
Um, so it starts out in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And I think when the S tier book starts out with something, where it decides to start is pretty important. It's pretty like it's really saying a lot. And what it's saying there, it seems to me, is that it's saying that uh, well, okay, everything was started with words. God is words, and words are God. That there's something divine about words. Um, and I think my understanding is that in Christianity, as humans, we have something divine within us. And I think what this is implying is that that divine thing that we have, at least from a materialist perspective, is our words.
Hmm.
That even if I don't take everything so literally, that there actually is something in itself godlike and divine about words and the way that words form whole worlds and universes. And further, the fact that it's saying words are divine and you're about to read a whole bunch of words telling you about what's divine, that's also significant too. It's basically saying like you can trust that what you're reading here is very important, divine. It's all words. I know it's words, but words are God.
Hmm.
All right. I have more to say about that, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty interesting interpretation. I would say what the passage is mostly doing is establishing like Jesus' preeminence. So he was begotten, not made. He pre-existed time.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, and the word is like the logos. And so that pretty much lines up with what I like what you said though about the power of words, and I think there's a lot of relevance to that in
Yeah.
this discussion. So there's so much is
I
popping
feel
up in my
like after
head.
reading this, I feel like actually I do understand Christians a lot better. I've lived with a lot of Christians, but actually reading this, certain aspects of Christians I understand better. Oh, a question I have. There's often lots of like capitalizations thrown in the Bible. So for example, they capitalize word
Hmm.
here, at least in my copy. Now I don't know if. Okay, so some historical questions. The Book of John. So okay, Jesus around. Well, okay, I know, understand he was 33 when it all happened. That was the big important year. So I got 5 years if I want to catch up to him. Is kind of my thinking. Of course not, but um, so he was 33, and so that's something like 33 AD is when this went down.
Something like that.
Um, uh now I've looked into historicity of Christianity. I think like Josephus is known as one of the oldest historians to talk about him. I think that's something like 100 AD or something.
Yeah.
So it's even 2 or 3 generations after.
Hmm.
Um, and my understanding is the Gospels were written um, a good bit after. Uh, were written a good bit after. Not well. Help me fill in the gaps on
Certainly.
this.
One thing I will mention is I definitely am not the intellectual powerhouse I wish I was in the
Mhm.
historical regard and a few other things, but I will give the best of my knowledge. I don't
Yeah, yeah.
think.
I'm also not expecting like totally. Let me give an example. I teach math, and I often give history to the students, and I'll be like, "Yeah, Socrates, that was like around 480. Algebra, yeah, it's like 1,000 AD. Sorry, Socrates was like a 400 BC.
Mhm.
1,000 AD is when we got algebra.
Yeah.
Like just to give general, it doesn't have to be exact. So what's even I understand this is your perspective of the
Yeah.
history.
Yeah, I would say the Gospels were probably within 30-ish years of the events. I don't know
Okay.
exactly,
Mm,
but yeah, and it's probably around there. Yeah.
okay. Um, and do you know? So I've heard. I think John is the last of the Gospels written.
Yes. Yes.
And when I was reading too, there's a little bit of confusion because there's like there there's passages where it talks about like the um the disciple that Jesus loved,
Oh yeah.
the disciple who's bearing witness about these things and who has written these things. Okay, this disciple, this is John.
Oh,
Is John the person writing this down, or is
jo-
John the well, John is a character in this. Sorry
yes.
to call him a character. I understand. Sorry for
No, it's fine.
being
For the sake
yeah.
of the narrative, we can call him a character.
Okay,
That's fine.
okay, okay, good. Yeah, I'm gonna use literary language when talking about this. I don't mean to. Yeah,
John
you know.
wrote John, who the divine the disciple Jesus loved. I actually can't remember if it specified who that is. I guess you could assume it was John, but I don't.
Well, yeah, the testimony of John the Baptist. So a lot of this has the testimony of John. So this is the gospel according to John. This is his testimony. But if this was written down quite a bit later, it probably wasn't written by John his own hand.
I think it was because I doesn't.
Okay.
I think
Sorry to pause
Acts.
for a second. I do want to do a quick Google. It's just
Sure,
a little
sure.
important for my interpretation of like, am I reading someone else's account of? Yeah, let me just read. Okay, who
I think it was
wrote
John who wrote John, and then also
when was
Acts.
the Gospel of John? Okay, John reached its final form around 90 to 110 AD, but it contains signs of origin dating back to AD 70. Um,
Never mind. Luke wrote
it is
Luke wrote
it is
Acts.
anonymous. It is anonymous.
Okay.
Like the other three gospels, it is anonymous in terms of who literally put pen to paper.
Okay. Interesting.
Um,
I thought it was I thought John was written by John and Acts was written by Luke. I looked it up, not John. So I got that wrong.
okay, okay. Um, not that I don't know that it's entirely the most important thing, but it's good to know. Um, so what was I gonna say? Oh yes, so they capitalize lots of stuff.
Mhm.
So for example, word is capitalized.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah. Help me understand. Occasionally, there's just some. Oh, I was wondering, what language was this written in? So the Old Testament, that's Hebrew.
And the New Testament
Written
would
on
be
Hebrew.
Greek. Yeah.
This would be Greek.
Yes.
Okay. And then there's also a common language at the time was Aramaic. They even mention Aramaic in this book, which I thought was interesting.
Hmm. I'm not
Aramaic is
sure.
interesting.
I'm
In
not
the
sure.
Talmud, they say angels can't understand Aramaic,
Mhm.
which is very interesting. The Talmud's full of all sorts of wacky, fascinating things.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Talmud.
I would say like in terms of why certain words are capitalized, anything that is another name for God is a pretty obvious
Yeah,
choice. Um,
yeah, okay.
and also one more
That's
thing to
funny. I think they're saying words are God. Good.
yeah,
I'm glad you said that. That's what I think they're saying. I think words are God.
I don't think
Okay,
that's
go
I
ahead.
don't think that's necessarily what they're saying, but and one other thing to note about the ESV is that a carryover from other translations is the word Lord all cap if it's Lord Lord all capitals, that's actually a substitution word for Yahweh. But
Okay.
because of a Jewish practice where you wouldn't use the word
You didn't
Yahweh,
actually say
that's
that.
kind of the
Yeah.
placeholder. Lord, the Lord is Yahweh, so you can read that as Yahweh if you'd
Yeah.
like.
Okay. Okay. Got it. So I'm actually like I know maybe everyone else wants to move on. I'm like not done talking about verse 1 at all.
Sure.
So uh so one of the things I've been thinking about lately regarding um I think that perhaps truly the divine spark in people is words. I think that that
Hmm.
is actually, there's a lot of scientific evidence that suggests that really what differentiates humans from other species is our complex language ability, that we're really not that far from certain primates in many ways, but uh, we reached some baseline level of language that allowed for a certain sort of intelligence explosion to occur
Right.
in the last. Um, well, every time our capacity to use words has improved, it causes a huge intelligence explosion. So the written word itself and the printing press and the internet all cause these things. Um, and uh, I so I don't know how to get into this softly, but I think that we live in a very interesting time where, as of the last year or two, now machines are capable of using the written word and understanding words at a level pretty close to people, in many cases far better than the average person. I don't know if you've used GPT-4 at all,
Of
but
course.
it's have you used GPT-4
Oh
or used the
yes.
free ChatGPT?
I've
The
used
free one or the
GPT-4.
paid one?
The GPT-4, the
GPT-4.
paid one.
Yeah,
Yes.
the paid one. It is incredibly intelligent, and it has caused for me an existential crisis that has made me decide to leave my career. I'm in the fall. I'm starting a master's of computer science to
Oh,
learn how to use AI to make tutoring, because I think humans are going to get replaced for tutors eventually. In my life, I'm going to get replaced by a robot. In
there's a
any
there's
case,
there's good evidence for that. Yes.
yeah.
That's I didn't know you were
So,
leaving your I didn't know you were leaving. That's pretty interesting.
yeah, yeah. I wanna stay within the education field and take what I've learned. I think I've really learned a lot of interesting, novel things by education, but uh, I don't have a lifetime to continue studying it. I think we're in a bit of an industrial revolution. In any case, um, I wanted to ask, what do you think about, so as an atheist looking out from the outside, one of the things that makes that like religion really explains is like what makes humans special. There's like this soul, this ethereal soul that
Yes.
has like this divine spark in you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what what does it mean if what if robots replace us
Mm-hmm.
and then the rest of the world is just run by machines? Something in the word actually implies that people that the divine spark also is born by water. That comes up later in John also. Um, so that would somehow exclude the robots, but from the outside
Yes.
looking in, if the humans are gone and all the interesting things on in the universe are being done by silicon, um, I feel like that seems to give some counter evidence to
Right.
the divinity of humans.
Yeah. To that, I
So
would simply say, in Genesis, and you've mentioned that you've read it. It talks about how man were made from apart from animals, and of course, we Christians would say that man is made in the image of God. And when I say man, I'm talking about men and women. Men and women are
yeah,
made in the image of God, and that's a distinct um, benefit that humans enjoy that any other organic creature does not, and that would also extend to any man-made creation. So if something's made in the image of man, that's not the same as being made in the image of God. So no matter how sophisticated, it's like the college university debates about would clones have souls. It's sort of like, well, the scary part is if we were to get AI and we were to get androids or something like that to look like and talk like humans and think like humans, they still wouldn't be made in the image of God. So the Christian view on it would just be, well, they don't actually have souls. They have the appearance of humans. They think like humans, but they're not actually bearers, God
yeah,
image bearers.
they call these in I don't know if you've heard this term, philosophical zombies.
Yeah.
P zombies. P
Hmm.
zombies. So that's the non-Christian, that's the atheist term
Yeah.
for something that looks by all accounts to be like a person on the outside. It's indistinguishable, but then there's nothing underneath. And I'm not sure I believe that P zombies could exist. I don't know. I kind of think like I'm not so sure that you couldn't make a human if it acts like a duck, talks like a duck. Maybe it is a duck. But in any case, I think well, if in the beginning was the word and the word was God, and now the robots have the word. They didn't have the word before. The robots have the word. Um then you might say that they do have some spark of divinity, but they're missing. You might say that they're missing something,
Yeah, certainly.
missing a further spark.
Yeah, I don't think they don't possess the soul that's made. And I would say too, it's interesting that you take the approach of like the word being God as the like literal words and symbols that we speak.
Yeah,
I don't think that's quite.
that's not how Christians are going to view this.
Yeah,
That's
certainly
like
not.
I'm viewing
But
it from the
but you're
outside.
viewing it
Yeah,
from the outside, and yeah.
yeah,
Um, so I'm sort of getting caught on that a little bit because it implies that if any creature or anything at all were capable of speech, that implies that they're like divinely inspired. And I don't know if I'm
yeah.
really willing to jump to that because I can see a future where like there's some sort of archaic ways. What's that meme of like man eat orange, me eat what's that like meme? There's
I
like
don't know this one.
it's like it's this they're talking about I think chimpanzees communicating with words and and they're saying the most
Hmm.
sophisticated sentence they've come up with is like me eat orange like it's just like, it sounds ridiculous and it's really funny. My point is like I don't think that words in and of themselves are important except that they're about the transportation of information between minds.
Hmm.
Like for example,
Hmm.
if you give a monkey, you somehow extend a monkey's life 1 billion years and he never dies, and
Hmm.
you give him a piece of paper and a paper, he'll eventually write Hamlet, probably, but he's not really writing Hamlet. He's just making markings on paper. So,
Right.
and that's like the meaningful difference to me between like information being transferred from intelligent minds and then just words. Like ChatGPT is spitting out words based on like combinations and like relevance to other words, and it's not actually saying the things that it's saying.
Well, on I'll disagree on ChatGPT. I do think actually it probably is smart.
Hmm.
But regarding like chimps, I think that the other animals, their language is not sophisticated enough to when it says word, I'm seeing it as uh a developed enough language that it's like a universal uh there's the notion of universal explainers, or maybe like a Turing machine. Have you ever heard of a Turing machine?
Yes.
You know, Turing machine. So you have such and such basic operations that allow you to compute anything.
Yes.
So I think that there might be some sense in which once you have a basic enough language, there's a certain threshold of language that once you reach that, that language actually might be enough to kind of explain anything that's explainable. And what I would say from here, from having the word, is the word, like the ability to make like the entire universe with words. So the chimps do cease to have that. They don't have that. They might be able to say "me want orange," but
Hmm.
they don't have. Their language is not capable of universal description.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, and our languages now or seem sophisticated enough. English and Chinese and Russian all seem sophisticated enough that you probably can use them to explain possibly anything humans could explain. That
Hmm.
may be the limits. You might argue the limits of what humans can explain or
Right.
what can be explained in human language.
Yes.
Um, uh, um, so in terms of like, I think just the fact that the monkey can spit out some words, its vocabulary is not, and its understanding is not deep enough. It's not deep enough that it can explain everything with those
Right.
words. But I
Right.
think if something could, that kind of that's a lot of what makes a human to me.
Yeah.
So when it comes to GPT-4, I'm I've talked enough to it. It's pretty fucking sorry.
That's all right.
It's pretty smart. It's pretty smart. Um, uh, it seems like it has an actual world model. Someone in the chat says it's incapable of having independent thought and free will. Now, I'm very skeptical of free will personally, uh, but independent thought. You dig enough, you can get ChatGPT to say truly novel things that no one has said before and no one would have said without it.
Hmm.
I've used it for some creative writing, and it really comes up with some very interesting aphorisms and wordplay. And
Hmm.
in any case,
From what I
I
understand
I
about language
yeah,
learning models, though, is it just identifies patterns and then replicates those patterns, right? I mean, it's not doing its own. It's probably using combinations of things and making and
it's not
connections
cut
that
and
way.
paste. No, it's not cut and paste. So basically, it's not cut and paste of different things. It
Oh,
has an
sure.
underlying world model,
Yes.
and basically, if it turns out that if you want to predict the next token best, so say you want to predict the next token to 3 times 4 equals, you want to find what is the next token. Well, maybe you need to understand a little bit about multiplication. You need to have an underlying understanding to that might be the best way to predict it.
Hmm.
Yes, maybe if you could copy paste every single idea ever, but basically it seems as if you just have a high enough dimensional space to work in. So ChatGPT is something like 220 billion parameters, so that's like a 220 billion by 220 billion dimension matrix
Yeah.
in linear algebra,
Hmm.
and it seems as if you just up the dimensions, it finds new connections between things and actually develops an underlying world model. And it seems genuine to me, and it seems like it's only going to get better. But maybe this is all pretty new to everyone. In any case, the word, it's definitely capable of doing some words.
That's true.
um, I want to say, is that all I had to say about words? Um,
Well, it's also notable that obviously God spoke in Genesis. God spoke
yeah, spoke the universe
existence
into
into
existence.
existence. So that's definitely
Yeah.
significant, and that ties back to your underlying point. Although I still don't think that's what's being said here, but it's still relevant to
I
what you're
think it's
saying.
yeah, I think it's like in some literary way it's like kind of referencing that.
Yes,
I think it is referencing that,
yes,
but
it is.
but it isn't
I
loosely.
believe that. I believe that it is.
Actually, this kind of gets me to maybe not words themselves, but I think one of the difficulties with the uh, Bible for me
Hmm.
is it's a incredibly rich text. It's literary in a literary sense. It's very deep, and I think in all the ways in which it's an interesting literary text, make it hard to form. In some ways, it makes it very possible to form a cohesive worldview, but it makes it very. There's a real interpretation problem.
Yeah.
So John, he talks a lot about. So I think there were maybe two themes. I didn't realize how much Jesus talks about like truth as a concept. Jesus cares a lot about the truth.
Yes.
Um and it kind of does explain to me a bit about how Christians act actually. I think now I understand a little more why people find Christians in the Smash community so annoying. I think Jesus is annoying. I think Jesus is really annoying. Like
Yeah, from a
he's
certain
just
point of
going out
view,
and
yes.
preaching about stuff, and he's constantly uh uh saying that like what he says is just plain true and you need to believe what he's saying.
But I would
But
also
when
say
it
Christians, faithful Christians would admit he is the one man able to do that.
yeah,
If that makes
yeah, I
sense.
think that's so I do want to get into uh the uh the reading of Jesus as a narcissist. That's one
Interesting.
direction I wanted to go in. But
Hmm.
before that, I think when it comes to interpreting the Bible and finding that truth, like I feel like I can take this thing and I can see real truth in it and see different things as metaphorical because it's constantly using metaphors
Yes.
and it is mixing up constantly something that's a metaphor for something that's literally true.
Yes.
And there is a lot of room to say this was literally true, this is actually just like metaphorically true.
Yes.
um and so I'm finding that I can read the Bible and really find real truth in it, a metaphorical truth, but um, not necessarily like literal truth. So,
Right.
for example, the notion of like the soul, that if I were in 100 AD, AD 50, saying that humans have a soul because they can use words and that there's something divine about this, it's like that's true, that's very true, that's definitely the case. And as we learn a bit more, maybe there is something that can be deconstructed about that. And I think like the fact that it's so open to interpretation makes it a evolving text. It makes it so that you interpret it different
Right.
500 years later versus 1,000 years later versus 2,000 years
Okay.
later. But then that also makes it hard to say, okay, many of the old traditions and the old interpretations, like which ones have to last forever and
Right.
which ones. Because one of the things also that's challenging with it is like he's saying, I am the last prophet. So, like, there's no one else that's going to come later.
Yes.
To me, that's infuriating. It's like, really? Like, like I can see why all the disciples watching him do all the incredible things he did find total faith in him. But I'm sitting here reading it and I'm like, I mean, what you're saying is all very interesting. But like, plenty of people say that they did very interesting things, and people are mistaken around them about what they saw. Or after a game of telephone, such and such happened.
David
Like,
Stream.
dude, if you came down and you showed me some of these miracles, you would convince me metaphysically about a lot of what you're saying. But like all I have is reading these words and I can only interpret them in the world that I'm in.
Yes.
I can't make the full jump that Jesus is asking me to,
Right.
basically.
That's pretty interesting. I want to touch on that, but first I want to say thanks
I
to
keep rambling,
Carl
so
for the 64-month resub and streak. Thank you so much, man, for being here. Um, yeah,
means
I
a
can.
lot. So you can cut in and stop me also. You can
Great.
cut in and stop me. If there's an idea that you hear and you want to get to, I might leave that idea to another place and then we might lose it. So just,
Sure.
you can cut in and interrupt me.
Happy to do that. Thank you for allowing me to. And same for me.
Yeah.
Darley, I turned up Drew a tad. Hopefully that's a bit better. So the translation problem, you've hit your finger on an issue that explains all the denominations in Christianity, as I'm sure you're aware. And then, of course, I would say with that, so I think the issue is the reason why there are so many interpretations is not that the Bible evolves over time. It is that we are limited by human understanding and our finite nature. And so really all we need is one account of what Jesus said, and then if we had perfect knowledge, we'd understand it, and there'd be one church, like one true Catholic and Apostolic Church. There would be there'd be no factions, there'd be no, and it would be obvious. But because we lack the ability to be all-knowing, and because there are just different issues there, that's why we have all these denominations, and that's why we're constantly trying to find new ways to understand the Bible in the different cultural contexts that we're in, because we're so limited by the place and time that we're in now that we can't always understand the same things that we did before, and we won't be able to understand the things that we'll understand in the future. That's what I would say to that.
Um, well, I think I don't know that a perfect account of what Jesus said would solve the issue. One, it sounds like Jesus did talk in metaphor a lot. So
Yes. Yeah.
even if we had the literal translation of what he's saying, and the metaphors that he's using are metaphors baked in the understanding and worldview of the time. Um, and if this is the word of God, and supposedly it is sufficient for the modern day, then perhaps it is meant to be interpreted within new cultural contexts,
Mm-hmm.
as applicable. So
Yes.
I struggle to see why, say I want to take it and say like, okay, this seems like maybe true, um but now we know that words aren't just human. And when he said that the word is divine all the way back when, well, if he did have the foresight that's claimed, where you would know everything that happened after and
Yes.
before, then perhaps in the present day, when we finally get evidence that that concept of words is evolved, we adapt our understanding of what Jesus is saying to say, like, actually, maybe the robots, maybe we are imbuing them with the same divine spark
Hmm.
that God gave us. But of course, I guess I'm kind of struggling to see how you get away from saying, like, I feel like you can just interpret all of it very metaphorically,
Right. Well, what?
indefinitely, and there's not a strong argument you can make either way that, like,
Sure.
we're not just supposed to interpret it metaphorically.
I would say, like, as a general rule, of course, there are biblical interpretation, exegesis is like a big discipline of its
Yeah.
own. But I would say in general, a rule of thumb is to interpret the implicit with the explicit. So if you're to if you're to say something like one let's dig into one controversial one. This is my body given for you. When you consume this, remember me and my death
Yeah.
and to when I rise
Yeah, yeah.
again. Like that's up for debate. It's across Orthodoxy and Catholicism and Protestantism considered different based on if you think about.
That brings me to a quote I want to read too,
Okay, sure.
just to put a pin in that, but continue. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That whole ordeal, is it completely a metaphor? Are we consuming elements that are symbols? Is there some level of literal meaning to that? When you consume them, do they become the literal body and blood of Christ as you consume them? You have transubstantiation and you have consubstantiation, and then you have purely symbolic. And fun fact, with Martin Luther, Martin Luther is considered the founder of mainline Protestantism through his 95 Theses and all that. But actually, it was a debate between him and Ulrich Zwingli, where Ulrich Zwingli argued that actually the partaking of the elements, and you're not actually literally taking of the body and the blood, those are symbols. And Luther insisted, I think he was a consubstantiation guy, where he said, no, it actually does become the blood and body of Christ. And so most mainline Protestant denominations actually...
Martin Luther.
That's
Martin Luther saying
yeah.
it literally.
Yes.
So that's the Reformation.
Yes.
That was the Reformation where Catholicism splits from were
Yeah.
Protestants, sorry,
So
split off from
yeah,
Catholicism.
real brief history of
Yeah,
Christianity.
yeah,
You have
yeah.
what's considered Orthodox, what's now considered Eastern Orthodox, which is considered like the earliest church
Someone had an
after
Orthodox
Christ.
Christianity bumper sticker
Okay,
today.
then that's what to what they're referring. And then you have different versions of Orthodoxy, but it's Eastern Orthodoxy, Russian Orthodox, and then at some point someone said, "Hey, we're pretty sure that Paul was, or was it Paul or John or Luke? I can't remember. One of them was the first pope, and he's somebody important, and we think this guy is the next pope." And so then that became Catholicism, where there was kind of the Great Schism, or I think it's called, where um Catholics basically said, "Yeah, we believe in the papacy and the authority of the papacy," and Orthodox said, "No, that you're making that up." And they're like, "No, no, it's been written all along in the Bible." And so then there's that split, and then over time, Catholicism goes through a bunch of crazy changes, like, oh yeah, indulgences, so pay the church this much, and that's how you go to heaven, and all these things were very contrary to what the Bible says, and so the Reformation was 95 problems with the Catholic Church that Martin Luther raised. He said, "Here are all the problems. We're paying people, like, you're paying the church to go to heaven. Where is that in Scripture?" So he developed what are called the five solas, things like solus Christus, sola scriptura, sola gratia. There's like a couple other ones, and the idea is it's Christ alone, through faith alone, the Bible alone, and sort of a return to like faithful
That
biblical
personal
Christianity.
relationship with God and that kind of thing.
Yes,
Okay,
and that kind of
makes
version
sense.
of that. Now, Orthodox would look at the Reformation and say, yeah, Catholicism kind of went haywire, but you guys are throwing out the baby with the bathwater. There's a bunch of important church traditions, there's a bunch of important books in the Bible that you're just throwing out for seemingly arbitrary reasons. Now, of course, a lot of the reformers have extremely well thought out and good reasons for what they did. It wasn't just sort of like, I'm going to pick and choose the kind of
We could debate
Christianity
like
that I
crazy.
want.
Yeah, I understand
Yeah,
what you're talking
but
about.
that's
Yeah,
but
I
that's
get what you mean.
that's certainly what Orthodox folks of the Orthodox persuasion would say.
Yeah. I have this is a brief purview into my background. My intellectual upbringing is in the long interpretation of vague text. So I found the
Hmm.
internet when I was 14 or so, 13. I was 13 when I got on the internet, and I spent about a year and a half because I was unschooled. I had all my time to myself. I spent about a year and a half straight doing Zelda timeline theorizing
Oh,
for The
fun.
Legend of Zelda. Yeah. So this involved going deep into text, and there were some vicious disagreements between people between like, does the Legend of Zelda games, do they happen on the adult timeline after Wind Waker? Do they happen on the child timeline after Twilight Princess? And then Nintendo comes in, they're like, that's all ridiculous. There's three time or whatever. It was all
I
insane.
remember
In
that
any
too.
case, yeah. So I have some 7,000 posts.
Hmm.
You know, these are long paragraph posts. This is how I learned to write, and this is why I'm such a schizo poster, just doing paragraphs. That's my upbringing. Um, and some of this reminds me of that, where you basically just have this text, and you have these things where we also had like the creator of it actually saying stuff, and even then, it was just insanely hard to really come up with great interpretations about what went where.
Yes.
Um, um, there was a point. Oh, I should have written it down.
You said there was a quote that you had in
There
mind.
is a quote. There is a quote that I have here that I wanted to read. Um, I underlined it. Um, it's an example of Jesus saying stuff that the people around him interpret one way, and then it turns out he actually, because he's the omniscient one from the outside, he means something totally different. So he gets to play all this interesting wordplay with people.
Yeah.
Where he goes in. So this is John 2. It starts John 2:13,
Okay.
where he goes into the temple and he's like, "You guys are." Actually, this whole story is kind of interesting because Jesus, see, he goes in the temple where there's like people are like selling stuff inside the temple, and this one I think is actually pretty interesting because Jesus comes off, he just comes off completely unhinged, like he
Yeah.
just seems like a crazy person.
Right.
Um, if you act like this now, well, within the Smash community, one of the things I was thinking in terms of protesting is, to what degree do I act like this? And I think people are just going to end up writing me off as some schizophrenic,
Correct.
crazy person.
Right.
Uh, but in any case, so he goes off and he does all this crazy stuff. He's kicking over tables and throwing stuff, and then he has this really wonderful quote where the Jews are like, what sign do you show us for doing these things? And Jesus answered them, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up.
Hmm.
The Jews then said, it has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days? But he was speaking about the temple of his body. When therefore he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. So this alliteration, not alliteration exactly, but equivocation between the temple as the place of worship, uh, to worship God,
Hmm.
of Jesus, literally his body
Yes.
being actually the thing to worship, giving some amount of prophecy that he's gonna die and then he's gonna be raised up 3 years after to show his divinity, and then also the basically the notion of the body as a temple in itself. I think I understand that this gets echoed in other places in the Bible, but I didn't read those parts. But I know that there's other elements where they say like the body's a temple and all that. And
Yes.
um, uh, uh, yeah, and I just think there's just so many times in the Bible where it just says stuff that, like, on one hand, like this is a metaphor for something, but on one hand, it's like they're saying it's literally true, but then on the other hand, maybe it's not literally true.
Hmm.
Um, it's all very hard to interpret. Um, and I think, oh, so this is one of my issues with, so in actually, I think this might be my fundamental issue with Christian morality. Um, uh, so I love all the stuff about forgiveness. I think in the Christian worldview, it totally makes sense. I think in a secular worldview, it totally makes sense. I don't think he's alone. I think there's a lot of similarities between Jesus and other. I'm not so familiar with the Buddha. I'm pretty familiar with Socrates, and there's a lot of similarities between Socrates and Jesus. Um, uh, and we'll talk about the martyr complex that Christians have
Yeah.
and their willingness to just completely destroy themselves in the Smash community over things like this. But that's something that really came across to me reading the Bible. It's like, oh, okay, some stuff about Christians really makes sense now.
Right. And
um,
and that's what's interesting about if you are so overwhelmingly convinced of something. Like let's say that you're a Christian and you believe that there's a heaven and you believe that there's a savior that came down and you're aware of this good news and you think not only is it your mission to make disciples and let and share this good news, but there is an active spiritual existence and campaign out there explicitly intending to suppress and obfuscate that information, you're going to feel emboldened to do that. And that's not an uncommon desire. It's not an uncommon experience for people that feel very strongly about any given topic. And so people that kind of come across that way, they make a lot more sense once you start understanding more about their worldview. And that'll go for any kind of political activism or any sort of other religious movement that would be associated at least in part with extremism. You go, what's the underlying reason for that? Why are they compelled to do these seemingly either insane or risky or dangerous things? Well, they're compelled by a certain worldview that informs them. This is the most important thing that there is, you know. So what else would you do in this situation?
yeah, I think it was interesting reading it. The emphasis on truth with a capital T and a willingness to die for it as a fundamental virtue in Christianity, it seems to, well, it clearly promotes when there's political things. It clearly promotes a lot of the, I don't know, underlying values that I see in Christians.
Hmm.
Um, but the other thing, okay, the thing that really bothers me, the thing that really, really bothers me is that it's like, um, that really what it comes down to, though, the most important thing, like there's forgiveness, there's standing up for truth,
Hmm.
but the most important thing is that you believe the truth that Jesus is giving. You must believe that truth. You must believe that. You must know it, and believe it wholeheartedly. And the difference between believing that truth is the difference between life and death. And in some interpretations, it's the difference between like, now I don't know exactly what the biblical basis is for some of these visions of hell, but it's the difference between this insane, endless, evil torture thing and
Hmm.
this ultimate orgasmic, beautiful, blissful existence permanently. So it's like even more than life and death. It's like heaven and hell. It's
Yes,
heaven and hell.
correct.
But like, but like when I say heaven and hell, I mean like, holy crap, hell seems horrible. It's
Y-
like from many interpretations, it's like really insane how horrible it is.
Yeah,
And then heaven is like, I don't know. I mean, maybe that'd be great, but heaven is not as insanely good as hell sounds insanely bad.
right,
And all of it is over like adherence and belief in something that like um there's just not there's not enough here
right.
for me to be able to believe it. And so I have to think that if God truly is all knowing and all good, um that some of this stuff about accepting Jesus and the truth and so on, um, it's got to be a bit more metaphorical than how Christians typically interpret it. Because the interpretation of like, yeah, it seems crazy to me.
So this is what I would
That
say to
seems
that,
crazy. Yeah.
and totally fair critique. And you're not certainly not the only one that thinks that way.
Oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
so like let's establish this picture of God. So God, what is God? Well, He's everything that's good in the world ever. Anything good that we experience is because of God. It describes God's attributes. That is the character of God. Whatever is good. So you simply ask yourself, what would a place look like where God is completely absent? Well, it would be the absence of anything remotely good, which would mean everything, the worst things you could ever imagine, ever. That is the absence of God. And so, heaven and hell is simply heaven is where God is, hell is where God isn't. And so, it's not a matter of God creating this perfect torture
You're
chamber.
saying so God is not in hell.
Not at all. Correct.
So God isn't omnipresent.
So that He is omnipresent insofar as God can be. So here's an example. When you say like God's omnipotent, He can do anything. Well, He can't sin. You could say, "Oh, gotcha." Like God can't do something. It's like, well, right, but
He's
that
bounded by like the laws of mathematics.
I wouldn't say that necessarily because He's outside of what makes sense in our space and time. And mathematics was designed, I believe, by God to make sense in our reality. But I think God exists outside of that completely. So insofar as we know of our reality, God is certainly omnipresent. He's certainly omnipotent, but He can't be something He's not by definition, right? Like He can't be Satan. He can't sin. He can't,
Mm-hmm.
So in that same way, I would describe heaven and hell as simply heaven is where God is, and right now God is He is constantly interacting with and part of Earth. Of course, Earth, our reality is full of sin. It's a sinful world caused by the fall of Adam and Eve, but he's not. If He was completely absent, we'd be in hell right now. But He's not. He's intervening. He's present. The Holy Spirit is interacting and all that. So that's what I would say to that. But I certainly understand how it seems like hell is like so much worse than heaven is nice. But I think to kind of make a clear picture of it, no, heaven's not just kind of nice. It's actually euphoric. It is incredibly amazing, and that's because we get unfettered relationship with God, and we have a marriage-like relationship with every other person that's in heaven, and that's
Well, okay.
that's great.
One thing is that for humans, um, uh, basically, there's like no upper bound on how horrible experience can be, but there's a lot of evidence that there's a bit of an upper bound on how pleasant an experience can be.
Hmm.
Um, and so that's why infinite bad is like much more conceivable than infinite good. and seems so
Darblingly gifted a
horrible.
tier
It's
1
just so
sub to
bad.
Major God.
Okay, some
This
of
is
the
your first
descriptions of
gift
hell,
subbing
it
the
just
channel.
can't be. It would be insane. It just God can't. There's a great book written by Scott Alexander. Have you heard of Scott Alexander? He writes Slate Star Codex.
I don't know that I've heard of
Um,
him.
he's a psychiatrist, famous psychiatrist, and also wrote basically a blog on rationality that was very famous and influential for a long time.
Interesting.
And so my girlfriend just got home. Can you close the door?
Hey, Darbley, thank you so much for gifting a sub to Major Guile. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Enjoy the emotes.
Um, but um, a lot of that book, basically, it's kind of a world where suddenly the world a rocket ship crashes into the crystal surrounding the Earth. When they go to the moon, they accidentally hit the crystal surrounding the Earth, and then it turns out like that opens up all the old magic of like the Jewish kind of Christian worldview. Turns out that the world actually literally is that, and so then all this kind of stuff seeps in,
Hmm.
and you can invoke all sorts of power by using all these words of God, and it's all very ironic and kind of funny but sincere. One of the main draws is how I think they call this theodicy, the study of like trying to explain the problem of evil, and also how can there be so much evil in the world, and then how can hell be so horrible in a world in which there is an omnipotent and omnibenevolent figure.
Mm-hmm.
And well, it does actually give a solution to it that I find convincing. It's not one that would fit in with uh, the Christian worldview, but
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, I just have to think anyways that it's just impossible that I don't know. Hell just seems it's just like the infinite torture.
Yeah.
It's just crazy. It's just too much. It's
And
not
that's fair.
good.
I guess
It's
maybe
not good.
maybe I ask you a question. In your opinion, so the way that I explain evil with my Christian worldview is there is an infinite, all-knowing, all-loving, benevolent, good God, and by definition of that existing, there has to be an opposite. So it's not like, oh wow, God, why'd you go ahead and make evil? If he didn't, if he wasn't good, there wouldn't be evil. So that's how I explain the existence of evil and the problem of sin and all that. So I'm curious from an atheistic standpoint, like how would you define, how would you reconcile the existence of evil?
Yeah, well, so for an atheist, obviously anything about having a foundation for morality and value gets extremely difficult. I mean, that's like one of the fundamental issues for atheists is how you
Right.
figure this out. Um, I don't really know. From my life, I've always been a moral anti-realist. So it's a position that essentially the concept of value and morality is like maybe doesn't it's not totally meaningful. It's really hard to define. In a practical sense, I do believe in it, and I think that well, I've kind of developed my own. I studied a lot about. I took a lot of philosophy classes in college. I was originally a philosophy major before I switched to mathematics. And there's a few different branches. There's deontology. There's consequentialism, which is like the broader form of utilitarianism.
Mm-hmm.
There's virtue ethics. I kind of think all these. I kind of think morality is very multidimensional, and so something could be good in a deontological sense, but not in a utilitarian sense. And perhaps free will is a person's ability to have their own, you know, scale for how deontological good is and how utilitarian good is and so on. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't worked it out in
Mm-hmm.
full detail.
That's
But in
fair.
any case, fundamentally, it's extremely difficult and probably, I don't know. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's very difficult for an atheist
And
to
and
give a
and
clear
that
answer.
is the single most honest, um, how would you say, clear answer I've ever heard from an atheist on the problem of evil for atheists. Because what I usually get is something to the effect of, oh, well, atheism is completely, or atheism, morality is completely subjective. It's either some form of cultural relativism where, oh, it's whatever the majority thinks at any given time, which I think is preposterous. But my issue with moral relativism as a concept. I know Sam Harris. You mentioned Sam Harris earlier. He certainly in his book
I
like
think he's actually a moral realist. I
he,
think Sam
he
Harris
yeah
is more of a
he's
realist.
a moral objectivist. In his book The Moral
Yeah.
Landscape, he gives an argument for why morality is actually deeply embedded and self-evident within nature itself, which
Yeah,
I think is pretty
yeah. People,
interesting.
I've actually read a lot of. I've actually read that book and one of his books on lying. People love to sneer at Sam Harris for bad philosophy, but and the naivete of his utilitarianism, but
Interesting.
part of his uh part of his, well, I don't want to get into exactly Samara's. I think it's a little more
That's fine.
defensible. His positions are a little more defensible than the Reddit,
Right.
than the Redditors will let you think.
Yes. And I agree with that too. And what I'm really getting at is like the sense of objective morality versus subjective. We have an ad break here, so I'm gonna engage with chat for a little bit, and then we'll go right back to it. Mr. Mystic Shorts. So God is omnipresent, but not in people who have not been cleansed of their sin. Something about God the Spirit lives in Christians, but not non-Christians. This is because God cannot have communication with sin. Right, and that's one of the other mysteries. Is in Exodus, God talks about hardening Pharaoh's heart, which also goes back to like our conversation about free will, which is actually another really interesting debate within Christianity about, because God's all-knowing, because he's all-powerful, omnipotent, to what degree are we living our own lives, or are we simply just pawns of what God has preordained and predestined?
Calvinists.
Exactly.
The Calvinists, right? They're like,
yes.
well, you were born morally unlucky. You're morally unlucky. You were born destined to be a heathen atheist, and you're destined for eternal suffering.
And I am a Calvinist.
Damn it.
I am a Calvinist, so I'm willing to.
Oh, okay.
I'm willing to go to bat for that. And it sounds very dogmatic, but
it's very logical.
Yeah,
it's very logical. I have a great respect for the Calvinism in terms of its willingness to bite the bullet of how insane it sounds and how internally consistent it is.
Yeah. So Carl says, have either of you watched The Good Place? I really enjoyed some of the ethical questions. I started The Good Place. I don't know. It wasn't my favorite. I tried to watch it because a lot of people recommended it. But have you seen it at all, Drew?
Yeah. I watched all except maybe the last 5 or 6 episodes of the show. It's cute. Yeah, it's cute. They made a sitcom about moral philosophy, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I liked it. I liked the concept of it. In practice, it was a little, I don't know. It didn't groove with me for some reason.
Well, it's certainly not super positive about Christianity.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't even gotten that far. I mean, I maybe watched the first 5 or 6 episodes.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. Let's see.
Well, yeah, I don't want to. You should try to get finish the first season. There's a twist that is interesting.
Okay. All right, maybe I'll give it another shot. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything else. Yes, Major Guile, Jesus does go off talking about the temple example you said earlier. Okay, I'll probably at least try to finish the first season, but I want to go back to what we were talking about. I want to remember what it was. You mentioned objective world morality. So I guess like my biggest problem with, so there's several layers to this. One, I think morality has to be objective for you to believe in it. You could very well say the point that you made where you say, well, maybe morality is just not very helpful, so we shouldn't like concern ourselves with it, but maybe in a more practical sense, we can use language like morality to make points and kind of communicate ideas, but it's not very helpful. That's one interesting point of view. But if you believe in morality at all, and you believe that it's real, it has to be objective, because otherwise you're talking about a set of opinions and tastes, and then you reduce what's morally evil to like what I don't like.
This was this was Kant's project, was to say like if morality is real, it like therefore must be objective, and what can we deduce about it if it is wholly objective?
Yes. The question at that point becomes, can we know that objective morality? Is it knowable?
So that's a big major problem. Yeah. And
yes.
So yeah, I mean, for a Christian, I don't think it's obvious for an atheist, it's really not obvious but that's because you don't have an underlying canon that you can look to that gives answers. I think the interpretation problem still makes it, in some sense, equally difficult for Christians, but they at least have some kind of metaphysical backing that like gives them a true faith that it is objective, whereas for the materialist atheist, you're always like, oh, but I guess like it is a void, like when we die it's just a void, there's nothing.
like here's a really, this isn't super sophisticated, but think of like, oh, if you saw a stop sign, like what do you do with that? Oh, well, I stop. Well, why do you stop? Oh, because it says stop. Well, if I put up a stop sign, are you going to stop? Well, no, the government made this one. Okay, so someone of authority made this sign, and so it's like, and from that perspective, it's sort of like, if morality can't just kind of happen. Like there has to be an intelligent thought behind any kind of law.
I wanted to actually, one of the things I'm looking at when doing this project of reading the different religious perspectives is if the moral realist claim is true that morality is real and observable to people, then then it should be reflected in major similarities between the different worldviews. It should really pop up. There should be some principles that pop up across all beliefs. I do think most of the major religions do have something concerning like forgiveness.
Hmm.
um and some there's other moral principles that are either secular or religious in nature. um okay, but my problem with the Christian morality is that it all boils down to belief. And well, you mentioned the lack maybe of free will. I don't think people really have control over what they believe. um I think the notion of free will is very problematic. I think there's really a lot of issues with the concept of free will. It's very hard to define. So the idea that we have free will of over anything is kind of really iffy. And further, that we have any free will over what we believe is like that's like a second order kind of free will,
Sure.
because like your beliefs are going to be what determines the actions that you take. So then you're asking about free will about your free will,
Right.
um, which is very finicky. And I think that there are ways that you can change your perspective or beliefs. The framework I'm working under, I am calling this in my mind hypnotism.
Hmm.
I believe hypnosis is a process by which you change your subconscious view of your perception, that perceptual aspect of your reality. And so this is where I'm going to end up differing from the different ideological perspectives there are now, whether it's some of the political stuff that we might get to if we have time, versus the Christians. Um, that okay, yeah, maybe I could just change what I believe. If you hypnotize me, if I just agree to be
Right.
hypnotized, like, yeah, I actually like,
You have
um,
to basically give into a premise. You have to like consciously give into a premise and then say, I'm gonna like turn a blind eye to this one premise, and then everything else I'll just kind of go along with.
yeah, I'm gonna go a little further. I think that humans, there are things you can do yourself that you could change your perspective on. So, but I get very uncomfortable when someone is saying, you need to do this.
Hmm.
You need to change your beliefs.
Hmm.
You need to hypnotize yourself.
Hmm.
So later we're going to discuss some of the ways in which I think that this is, to me, the fundamental idea of religious liberty is that I am free to have my own underlying perception of the world, and I can be true to this, and no one can tell me that I have to change that underlying perception. I totally believe them that if they made me, they could make me. I think they could hypnotize me or brainwash me. I really think I could be susceptible to that if I gave in. Um, and so I want to make an analogy. So in a bit, if we get to discuss the political things, I think some of the questions of, say, okay, so like right now there's this big division on like how do we handle gender, and so the Christian worldview around gender or sex is not very compatible with the current maybe progressive worldview of this, and this is like a metaphysical belief. Like this isn't an ethical one. It's like how do you literally perceive the world? Um, and so when some of these people say, well, you just need to be better and learn and change, and you need to change how you act, and then you'll change how you view these people. I actually believe that. But what it feels like to me is the same as when Christians have told me, well, if you come to church every Sunday and you accept Jesus Christ as your personal savior, and you do this and you do that, eventually you will begin to feel the love of God in your heart. And I'm like, I think so. Yeah, I think if I hypnotize myself, I will start to feel the same as
Hmm.
you.
Hmm.
I don't really want to do that. I don't.
Right.
And I have a personal example that convinced me of the malleability of the human mind when I was 17. So I'm 28 now. How old are you?
I am 31.
31. Okay. So when I was 17, on the internet, I read about this. Have you ever heard of tulpas?
No.
So tulpas are this idea of imaginary friends, basically,
Hmm.
but for adults who have imaginary friends. Um, and I think tulpa comes from some kind of there's some kind of yeah tulpamancy yeah there's some kind of like there's different views like I think tulpas had a spiritual component one time, but there's a secular kind of tulpa that you can make, which is basically just instantiating a second personality within your mind that totally feels like a separate person.
Hmm.
I found this very interesting, and I probably spent 3 weeks or something really doing this. So I would meditate for half an hour, get myself into some kind of deep trance, and then I would spend some time visualizing this second personality, this second person, visualizing them in space, visualizing things about them, thinking things about them, move through the world with this person. And for a while, it's a totally like it's just a character you've created.
Mm-hmm.
And then it spoke to me. And then I heard a voice inside my head that wasn't mine. I didn't like and then I thought better of it. I thought, you know what, maybe I shouldn't give myself schizophrenia. Maybe I shouldn't like meditate myself into schizophrenia intentionally. Maybe that's not a good thing to do.
Hmm.
um, and if you look at descriptions on the internet of people doing this, people claim, and it sounds crazy from the outside, people claim that they can ultimately, literally, like change their perceptions to the point where they can hear their tulpa, they can see them. And these are people who didn't otherwise have, like they're saying, they didn't otherwise have any medical condition beforehand. They've just spent so long kind of working on it, they can create actual hallucinations. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's well documented that you can hallucinate just from meditation
Mm-hmm.
without the use of drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, uh, and so in any case, that convinced me that truly through effort, you actually can like change the way that
Yeah.
you view the world.
Mm-hmm.
And uh, what scares me about the Christian morality is that they're basically saying, you need to submit or
Right.
else you're the worst. You're the
Right.
worst if you don't submit.
Well,
Um,
if you don't mind,
and
let me
to
take a
me,
different.
it feels narcissistic.
Sure.
So-
Let me paint it a different way. I would say as a response to that, um, you're not the worst, distinct from every other person. Everyone is the
yeah,
worst. Every human is the worst.
yeah, yeah,
Christianity makes a claim. It makes a claim about reality. It makes a claim about goodness and and it makes a lot of claims. And the way that I look at it is, here there are a bunch of claims. There's the Islam claim, there's the Judaic claim, there's Hinduism, there's the atheist claim, there's the secularist claim, the naturalist claim, or whatever you want, how you want to describe it. Of these claims, which one requires the least amount of faith to get to? Which one has the most evidence, and which was the most compelling? Um, and each of them, properly understood, are just as, you could use the word, exclusive. They're just as discriminatory. Um,
Mhm.
in a certain way, where you can be a universalist and you can say all roads lead to Rome. If you believe in your version of God, that's great and all. There's nothing really to that because that's not really true. If you dig into any of these books, they're all making these exclusivist claims, like this is the only way to, whatever, heaven or inner peace or whatever the enlightenment, whatever the end goal is. So I simply look at what Christianity says. Christianity says you must believe, and you will be saved. And you can look at that and say, wow, that seems very, like, I don't know, like self-serving. But what's the alternative? I guess like let's start with the creation of the world and the cosmological argument, to use what Aristotle said. So if the world began, if nothing happened and then something happened, or there was someone outside of space and time who made everything, what really is the most plausible of those two explanations? I would always say the uncaused cause, unmoved mover every time.
Can I butt in?
Of course, if you
Uh,
don't mind, I'd like to finish this thought and we can go back to that.
okay.
So like that's like one little example. The case for morality, which we just discussed, you presented like, well, it's sort of a hard thing for atheists. It's very clear cut for Christianity, and it's cohesive and it fits in very, very, what I would say logically in a way that just makes sense to me. And so you either have a lane where you have to adhere to a certain set of beliefs and make a certain leap of faith, or you have to align with a different set of beliefs and make a larger leap of faith. And I'm just concerned with what's the shortest leap of faith to make and what has the most compelling evidence. And I'm acknowledging that leap of faith is only required because of our lack of knowledge and our finiteness. That's what I would say about that. So to go back to what I said about uncaused cause, what is your comment on that?
Oh, well, I want to just add a little bit about Aristotle. Uh, Aristotle said a lot about uncaused causes. He said the universe abhors a vacuum. That's why there can't be nothing. And he was not vindicated by history. Basically, at least in terms of mathematics, it took us, the West, an extra 1600 years, 1500 years to view zero as a number because of the damage caused by this
Hmm.
notion from Aristotle. The notion of infinity, Aristotle considered completely destructive, and likewise its alternative, nothingness, completely destructive. And Because of the influence of Aristotle, it took us, instead of 500 years, it took us 2,000 more years to develop calculus. Basically, as soon as we got nothingness in terms of zero mathematically, and we got infinity, and as soon as we were fine grappling with those concepts, basically calculus came very, very, very quickly afterwards. So I
Hmm.
think historically, the case that Aristotle is making, it didn't pan out great historically. Um, uh, Unmoved causes. I mean, it. Well, I've always been totally unconvinced by the cosmological claim. We really don't know what the hell caused the universe. We don't know what caused God, and we could say that whatever it is that caused all of it is God, and probably the Christians and the deists and the atheists could all call it that. But that's such a far cry from like the God of this text and the God of that text. Um,
I wouldn't
um,
say that because God doesn't need a cause by definition of existing outside of space and time. Because we can observe time passing, we know that existence had to have a definite start, no doubt about that. But we don't need to answer the question who started God because God has always existed. And so
Yeah,
it's
I'm
not.
just saying, like, whatever you say about God in that sense, you can just say about the universe.
I don't
Like anything
think
that you,
so. I don't think so.
well, I guess like there's no reason the universe couldn't just start itself or have always existed in the same sense that God does.
I don't think so because we can observe time passing and we have uh, man, I'm a little out of practice on exercising these talking points, but it's something like,
Me too. I argued with many Christians when I was a
yeah,
teenager about the
and I
cosmological
loved
argument.
debating all this
Lots.
stuff with atheists.
I
It's
used to
so
go to
fun.
sleep watching, what was it, Sam Harris debate. Who was the big Christian debater guy? He would do these arguments a lot.
I'm
Um,
not
You would probably know him.
probably.
Big Christian debater guy. I just want to get the reference because I think we can probably relate. What was his name? William Craig? Was that it? William Lane Craig.
Okay, yes, I do know that name.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he was a big proponent of these arguments. Anyways, go ahead.
Yeah. Um. Uh. Oh, so it's something like um we're trying to figure out how the universe began because it had to have a beginning.
No,
Hmm.
not necessarily. No.
Hmm.
Um, so unfortunately I'm gonna have to like math mog you. You know this mog term? It's like a 4chan term.
Oh no.
I got hype mogged. I went in there, I got hype mogged, and the and the girl wanted the tall guy instead of me or whatever. Or I got strength mogged or I got melee mogged. Anyways, I'm gonna have to math mog you. Um, so my understanding is the Big Bang we can trace back to when it occurred, but that doesn't mean that there was a first moment. There can be a lower bound on moments, but that doesn't mean that there was a first moment. In topology, we would call this an open set.
Hmm.
Um, so you would consider since time began, um, you might say that time started at, I guess what I want to say is that like the open interval, we're gonna need diagrams. Hold on, so I can show everyone. So there's this terminology that if you took high school math, you probably have seen. There's the difference between there's a difference between the set of numbers from 0 to 1, the open set, and
Mm-hmm.
the closed set. Uh, the open set here from 0 to 1 is, we would say, homeomorphic, isomorphic to the set from -infinity to infinity. It really makes no difference what you call it, whether it's 0 or -infinity or whatever. Um, it's identical because, sorry, I'm mirrored, so it's really confusing. I can't see from my camera correctly. Um, so here, oh my God, I can't get this on camera properly. There would be a first moment. Here, there would be no first moment. There isn't necessarily a start. There isn't necessarily a start. We might be able to trace back to when everything was still very, 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 very close together, but that does not imply that there actually was a moment that everything began, that there was like a time equals 0,
Hmm.
nor that there was something before that.
Interesting.
Um,
Help
yeah.
me understand then. This might tie back to what you're saying about Aristotle and actual infinites and all that. I'm under the impression that actual infinites don't exist in this reality because, like, you just talk about I forgot the word where it's
Infinites do exist in this reality.
well, but
Uh,
infinites can start
so
from a certain
even
point
the
and
Greeks
go to
talked about
forever.
like Zeno's paradox. So
Paradox.
basically, you can cut a time. You can, well, it was called Zeno's paradox, yes, because it bothered a lot of people in 400. Now we have calculus, and we're okay with it. We're okay with it. It's not really a paradox. So uh, basically, between any 2 points is an infinity of points, and you can always get ever, 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 ever closer. You can take that and cut
Mm-hmm.
it even closer. You can take that and cut it even closer.
Mm-hmm.
So the amount of points of time between 1 second to the next is infinite.
Right.
So there are infinities. There are infinities in the real world. There are actual infinities, but I think when you say there are no actual infinities, that word actual is carrying a lot of weight. So there are things you can model mathematically as infinite. Um, but as well, uh under general relativity, things get especially murky when everything's very close together. Uh, Time passes very strangely. Um, so one could argue there's been infinite points of time since the start of the world. This, I shouldn't say the start of the world, but since the world started, you could say. Yeah, yeah. But there's no, it's not. There's no evidence. I don't think it's so clear cut to say like th that there was
Hmm.
a moment that everything began and something
Okay.
had to happen to make that happen.
Cool. All right. I'd
Yeah.
love to because I'm just running out of knowledge at this point. I would love to come back with you sometime in the future
Yeah.
and think about this again because I think the cosmological argument is really interesting. But I still don't
Mhm.
find it the most convincing. I actually think the ontological argument, the existence of morality, is the most convincing argument for
Well, the
Christianity.
problem with um, well, yeah, I think the issue is with morality is still just like, yeah, it's very difficult to perceive. It's not, it's non-physical. It's the rest of it perceiving non-physical things.
Hmm.
Um, But for the purpose of this, though, I'm kind of going through a little moral realist arc. I don't know if ultimately I'm going to end up being a moral realist, but I guess what I'm trying to explore is like, if moral realism is true, then there definitely should be some clear moral principles. If morality actually is perceivable
Hmm.
and it's an actually real thing,
Yeah.
then there should be some major intersection between all the different moral
And
perceptions.
I'm gonna run a Christian filter through that real fast, and I'll say it is clear. It's actually written on our hearts, but our sinful nature constantly gets in the way of that, and our limited knowledge obfuscates an otherwise obvious moral decision to be made. And you
Sure.
can also
Okay.
convince yourself, like what you were saying with hypnosis, you can convince yourself something that's abhorrent and wrong is right over any given period of time if you
Yeah,
just
sure.
convince yourself of it over time.
Um, okay, so then I want to say that the morality of like you have to believe in that this is the fundamental moral unit.
Hmm.
I don't think that that's good. I don't think this is reminiscent of many abusive tendencies, I think, in
But
the world. And when
so here's a question though.
Jesus is, and hold on,
Yeah.
this is so that I want to explore Jesus as the narcissist
Sure.
here.
Can we do that in a
Uh,
second though? Because I'm curious about that. If there really was a moral objective standard and you happen to know it, how else would you communicate that information?
um, well, if the objective moral standard is that you must also believe in that objective moral standard or else infinite torture, then I think we're all screwed. I think that we're all very unlucky if that is the objective morality, that the objective morality is actually based around belief. I think that morality shouldn't be based around belief, it should be based around conduct. I think that
Well,
beliefs are amoral. I think that beliefs are
that's interesting.
non-moral. I think beliefs are perceptions.
Right.
I don't think that we should. And so my task partly in reading the Bible is to try to save this by finding metaphorical ways in which you have to believe in Jesus to be saved. Um, because otherwise, when I think of literally a guy going around saying, if you don't believe in me, you're all gonna not only die, ultimately you're gonna burn, and you're going to have infinite life if you believe exactly what I'm telling you. It comes across as abusive. It feels abusive. It feels like he's like really. It would be unless he's so lucky that he's totally right. But anyone else doing any of this would
Mm-hmm.
be ultimately abusive. It would
But
be
I would say
ultimately abusive. It'd
I
be
would say
incredibly abusive.
belief is not a manipulative like worrying tactic. Belief is a blessing of a shortcut because like the claim of Christ and really the just the reality of it is we're all sinful human people that make mistakes when we even don't want to. We've done things we're not proud of, all that. So if the standard is to actually be a moral person, you're asking to be Jesus, you're asking to be God, which is not possible for us. So if you're only concerning yourself with conduct, as you said, only considering yourself with what you've done, we've already failed the test. And so to me, that's a much more bleak outcome. With belief,
Yeah, I
that's an
agree.
invitation to basically
I
be
believe that
saved.
we have all. In fact, this is one of the things I like about Jesus. I believe that we have all. Oh, what is it? It was reading this story that you sent me that made me decide. Okay, I need to read the whole book of John. Let me read the quote. It's a very famous quote, but it's really awesome. It's a great quote. The woman's caught in adultery. She's adultery. It's not totally clear to me. Does that mean she was just having sex out of wedlock, or was
I
she
don't think
doing some
I don't think it's
cheating on
specified.
someone? Yeah, but she was doing some sexual immorality,
Yeah.
and all the townspeople are all sitting around and they're like, "Stone her, kill her. We need to kill her. That's what Moses said. Moses said, stone anyone who does this." And then Jesus comes in and he says, and they ask. Okay, so now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?
Mhm.
This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. I don't totally know actually what that's about. And as they continue to, very interesting because he writes a little bit on the ground, but doesn't say what he wrote on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." I think this circles around this moral principle that yes, we're all messed up. Like
Yes.
we've all made mistakes, and because of that, if we want self-love, we also need love of others. We need understanding of others' mistakes. I think this is a wonderful moral principle. Um, uh, so yes, when it comes to conduct, um, no one no one will be perfect, but perfect wouldn't exist. Or you know what? This is some kind of asymptotic thing. I'm saying that you can drive towards that. You could always improve. And then you're saying, well, there actually is a difference. There is a moral perfection
Hmm.
out here, and you'll never reach it. But there is a point out here that you'll never reach.
Hmm.
I think that forms an interesting. I could talk about the math of that set. It's quite interesting. But
Hmm.
um uh one second. I got lost thinking about diagrams. Um I'm fine saying you'll never be perfect. I'm even fine saying there was a guy who was perfect.
Hmm.
Where I get caught is um that uh that the most important thing that you can do beyond all this action stuff is believe that guy,
Gris.
believe that guy,
Hmm.
that like you could keep like I that like I feel like I could try to live a good life my entire life and be skeptical of this, and the idea that I'm going to end up getting burned in hell over just not believing a guy that didn't give enough evidence to believe in him. I think that that's horrendous. I don't think that that's totally. I don't. I have to. If I think that Jesus is the pinnacle of morality, I have to think that there's something more metaphorical there, that perhaps um that maybe monism and the need to believe in a greatest thing, maybe that is important so that we don't descend into a total nihilistic irony, that we really do need to believe in something.
Hmm.
But that something has to literally, and not like at his time he said, well, you should believe in my thing, but like literally today, you need to believe in like these really specific claims, or else you will literally like burn in hell. Like that to me, it's not, it doesn't seem moral. It does not,
And
it
that's
does
fair.
it,
That's fair.
yeah.
But again, everyone deserves hell. It's not a matter. It's sort of like the
I
default.
disagree with that. Yeah, I disagree with
Yeah,
that.
and that's fair. But from the Christian
No one
standpoint,
deserves hell.
from the Christian standpoint, everyone does, because we've all fallen short of this moral standard. And so let's say, remember what I said earlier about heaven and hell. So in heaven, there's no room for sin at all. There's no room for any kind of evil of any kind. And so what does that mean for every human on the planet Earth, including Adam and Eve? It means they would all be stuck in hell because they've all sinned. There's no place for them in heaven. So the whole point of Christ existing is nothing you do can get you to heaven. Christ is the one sinless man to have ever lived. He is the only one that lived a full life who is actually, based on the merit of his works, is able to sit at the right hand of God. So that renders all humanity unable to go to heaven. So in substitution, Christ died on a cross and has atoned for all of our sins, so that belief becomes the substitution for needing to be like Christ. We're still called to be as morally good as we can be, but the knowledge and expectation is we will never be perfect, even though he calls us to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, it's a great act of mercy that this belief is an option, because if it wasn't, we would never be in heaven. And if you're of the mindset, like you just said, where you don't believe anyone deserves hell, this has to do with like a human nature thing, where if you think humans are inherently sinful or not, and if you even want to use the word sin, I understand if like that's an awkward word for you.
I mean, I don't believe anyone deserves torture for anything. I don't think anyone does. I'm against that totally.
But and that's fair. Let's say though there was a moral standard, and let's say that moral standard was perfection.
Mm-hmm.
So and if you were to not be perfect, you are, every time you sin, you are disobeying and you are dishonoring God, right? So from that standpoint, it's not like there's a choice if the standard is perfection. If you're not perfect, that's it, right? You're just,
Mm-hmm.
that's the way that it is.
I'm totally fine with unbounded, unattainable perfection. I'm not okay with unbounded, infinite destruction and torture for um, people that are unlucky enough not to be convinced of some like strange abstract like thing. I think that the interpretation that I have to take with it is that the saving yourself that you find for following Jesus, it must be some internal saving of yourself that that you're believing in some kind of perfect good, and that you must you're obligated to kind of march towards that. That is saving yourself spiritually. That and but I feel like um it doesn't make sense if there's no way to arrive at that without like doing a little ritual where you accept Jesus Christ as your personal savior.
Hmm. And fair enough.
Um, yeah, there's got to be like it violates. I feel like it just violates like moral principles. I don't think it morally makes sense. I think it's like contradictory to the rest of the Christian morality that
Hmm.
like uh you have to. I don't know. Yeah, the idea that we're and I think that's one of the big things I'm just really upset with our culture is this like punishing people for their beliefs. I think like insofar as your beliefs lead you to good conduct or bad conduct, and I
Hmm.
think that um I've talked before about isomorphism. Isomorphism is this mathematical. Have you heard of this term before?
Yes.
Yeah, so isomorphism is essentially saying two things are equal in structure, but maybe not name. The numbers from 0 to infinity with multiplication is isomorphic to the numbers from negative infinity to infinity with
Yes.
addition. They're basically the same thing.
Hmm.
Or I'm trying to think of other examples that are for people that haven't done tons of math of isomorphism. In any case, I feel like there would be moral goods that would be like isomorphic to the Christian one. And it's like that. I, it just seems crazy to me that like we're saying like all non-Christians are automatically going to be punished far worse than the best of the best by any other moral standard,
Hmm.
by the best of the best
Well,
of
that
the
that's why
non-Christians.
I'm really interested in what is objective morality if it exists. Because what you just said is like it seems your critique is that it seems morally incomprehensible, and I go based on
Even
what?
incomprehensible, not even incomprehensible, morally abhorrent.
Sure, just sorry, I didn't mean to
Any
I
moral
didn't mean
principle,
to
yeah.
misspeak. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
morally
I'm
abhorrent,
saying something even stronger.
and
Like
that's fine.
according to my moral sensibilities, it's not that I can't understand it, it's that I'm like
You're
that
against it.
actually sounds
Yes,
evil. Yeah.
yes. But my question is, what is evil to you? Like I don't understand for an atheist what that means.
Um well, I don't know if I accept moral realism. If I accept, say, the sanctity of human life,
Hmm.
all life is created evil, then I think that even the worst criminal has the same inner value that
Yeah.
even the most morally righteous
Hmm.
who has accepted Jesus as their personal savior. I don't think that the person who repeats some magical spell should suddenly be exempt from their crimes. And I don't think someone who fails for whatever reason to end up speaking that magical spell could be punished for all those crimes. I think that that's like an archaic morality. I don't think uh, if you're asking metaphysically, where do morals come from? I mean, no one knows. I don't think that the religious mindset really explains where morals come from either. It's the euthyphro problem. It goes back to the ancient Greeks. Does God love it because it's pious, or is piety loved by God because God is pious, or is it pious because it's loved by God? I
Right.
don't think that I don't think that the morality problem is really solved just because you found a moral canon on which to base your morality. I don't think it solves the issue of like that there is a moral
Yeah.
canon. I'm not going to have a solution to that as an atheist,
Hmm.
but I
But
feel
again, and
like
that's fair, and that's totally fair. Everything you're saying is fair.
yeah, yeah.
But I guess to me, when you make a moral claim, when you say something like "I can't accept Christianity because the claims that are making are morally abhorrent,"
Even with the
It's
claims of Christianity, like if I accept the moral principles of forgiveness and love for others,
yeah.
and that everyone's created equal, and
Mm-hmm.
all this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
even the notion of original sin, all these things, but all that stuff is seems incompatible with like a literal hell for those who
Right.
literally don't say like a magic spell. Like
Right.
it seems like there's got to be some like
Yeah, no, no, but see, but
some
if you use Christian theology, it actually is merciful for the reasons that I explained. Is that if you use a Christian worldview to understand morality, it's that the standard is perfection, and God is the literal embodiment of all that is good and all that is morally perfect. And we're not little gods running around. The one that was named Jesus, and we are not Jesus. He is the one
Okay,
exception.
here's the problem is I could read the Bible and come to an interpretation, a metaphorical interpretation like this that I'm
Hmm.
talking about. One which makes me maybe not believe in like a literal Jesus that did
Hmm.
these things, but makes me want to live like him and do things like him and really embody all of his different principles.
Yes.
And that ends in eternal suffering and hell because my interpretation. There's the interpretation problem I think is a
Yeah,
real
I agree.
I think the idea of tying huge moral weight to the interpretation of our world is a big issue. So I have a great sympathy, and I might be like an existentialist, like an absurdist. Like the universe we live in is absurd, like it's really crazy, and we're
Yeah.
all just kind of like coming up with our own weird models for how it is. And
Hmm.
the idea that one person's model is that model itself, that perception itself carries moral weight. I just don't think that that's like
But again,
I think that's contrary to
for
yeah.
anyone that understands Christian theology, that's a blessing. So we're all in like moral debt. We're like drowning in moral debt. We are like not even close to where we need to be. And every other religious belief says, well, maybe we're all not where we'd like to be. We're all in like, moral debt or however you want to think of it. Here are all the things you have to do to get out of that debt. Cool, hunky dory. Now I have enlightenment. Now I'm whatever. But
Okay, yeah,
Christianity
I think
says
all those things that you do. Oh, sorry. Okay,
but Christianity
I thought you said
says,
Christianity.
no, no, no. Christianity does not say that.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
every
It
other
says
religion says.
one thing that you do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not purely merit based for salvation, and that's actually the beauty of it because it acknowledges that we're all in moral debt, and we can't. There's nothing we can do to get out of it. We can improve our situation marginally, but we don't get to that perfection point. So that's where the belief comes in, and that's because of what Christ did on the cross. It is not from our own action, and thank God it's not, because if it was, all of us would be live the rest of our lives apart from God completely, and we know that is hell. And
Well,
so,
I feel like you're trading. You say it's not merit based. I think that's good. I think it's good for it not to be wholly merit based. That our value is there regardless of our merits. I think that's a good moral principle. But I feel like the Christian morality is trading. It's saying, well, it's not merit based. Instead, it's luck based. It's RNG.
depends on your
Unlucky.
perspective. Depends on your perspective.
Unlucky. You're just unlucky, man.
Hmm.
And um yeah, I feel like whatever the religious I actually feel like I almost demand walking into the Christian worldview that if it truly is morality, then I should be able to walk if I search for enlightenment my whole life and I find a whole set of things that makes me compatible with the Christian and it makes me compatible with the Muslim and it makes me compatible with the Hindu and the Buddhists and the atheists um that um that shouldn't be punished that I don't know, it just seems well in any case.
Yeah,
We could probably change the subject though. I think it was an
sure.
interesting spirited
I totally
conversation.
agree. Yeah, thank you so
Yeah,
much
yeah.
for that was awesome.
um so uh yeah, well, okay, so my so I see someone in the chat. Yeah, people born before Jesus got the shaft. True. Now, one thing that's kind of lucky is most of humanity was born after Jesus because of the
No,
population
Christ
explosion.
died for everyone, even including those born before Christ.
Okay.
That's part of
Yeah,
it.
what happens to the people who were born before?
I don't know the specifics on it.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah,
You're
but
sure Jesus is a good guy.
but
Something's wrong.
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they're probably in heaven. Like I don't know. I'm not God, but like, you know.
Okay, wait. Okay, hold on. So you think you could get to heaven without having accepted Jesus as your personal savior?
Um, I think, let me put it this way. So the Old Testament and the New Testament have different rules. In the Old Testament, you had to sacrifice animals. You don't have to because Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice. So we're not slaughtering
Yeah,
animals anymore. You'd be looked sideways.
the Lamb of God.
Yes, exactly. And so there were different standards, but at every moment there were different ways to atone for your sin. Why did they do animal sacrifices? Well, it was all about atoning for your sin. So there were certain standards. God was more actively involved. He would show up. He would cause world floods. He would do things that he just doesn't do anymore, and that's because of the covenant that he made with us, because of Christ and all that. So there's simply a different set of standards. But Christ still died for the sins of every person. So that includes individuals who predated his life. In terms of who's saved and who's not, no one knows the answer to that. The only person that knows that is between you, your own heart, and your own person. I can't say if my wife's going to heaven. I like to think that she is, based on her profession of faith and based on the fact that we live in a Christian marriage together. But I can't say for certain because I don't know her heart ultimately.
Can you say for certain for you?
What do you mean by that? Oh, I would like to think I know my beliefs, and I
like to think.
Yeah.
You acknowledge some uncertainty.
I acknowledge, and that goes for everything, by the way. That extends to Christianity itself. So to go back to what I said a long time ago, I'm all about considering what has the best evidence, what has the shortest leap of faith, and so far Christianity is won by every scale that I can understand. And so a lot of it is my best crummy guess about what truth is. And my hierarchy of values, we've talked about this before. Truth is like the number one value that I hold to. And if someone says, "Hey, David, here's a thing that you said. Here's why it's actually a lie," gives good evidence, and I'm able to understand that evidence, and I can change my mind, like that's great. I will to the best of my ability drop the thing that I thought was true and adopt the actual truth at every step of the way if I possibly can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I guess I think if I take Christianity, I just kind of think I have to have some kind of metaphorical view of what went down with Jesus, and that maybe at the time even the strongest thing was to believe in him literally, especially for those who got to see what happened. I think maybe that I can understand that. Like if you actually saw him perform some of these miracles and you still doubt, it's like, okay, really, were you not waiting for the Christ to appear? It's kind of a big, there's a lot that, this is another element actually reading John, and this came up a lot for me reading it, is that a lot of it is him like being like, see, I am, look at all this stuff I'm doing, and you're seeing with your own eyes. And it's like, for those people at that time, great. I'm not getting to see any of that now, though. I'm not getting to see any of that now. And so I
Right.
feel like that same standard, like, I'm gonna have to believe in is gonna have to be more metaphorical about what
Right.
he's done, and hence the standard applied to me upon my ultimate judgment is gonna have to take that into account
Can I
in
respond to
some
that?
way.
Because I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
an
yeah.
interesting point. But if you think about Exodus and how
Okay.
God delivered his people out of Egypt and Moses led them, and there were two massive pillars of water that they walked through. And then a little bit after that, they're like, "Oh yeah, let's go back to worshiping like this golden calf." It's like, excuse me, you walked through water. You're eating manna. Why would you go back to worshiping golden calves? Like what more physical evidence would you possibly need that worshiping a golden calf is probably not the right thing to do, and worshiping the God that led you out of slavery is probably the right thing to do? So the point is, like, it doesn't matter how explicit and how in your face God is, we're still sinners, and we're still gonna worship things we shouldn't. We're still gonna stray.
I'm sure I would still make mistakes if God came down in front of me, but I'm saying if he actually gave me an unambiguous sign like these disciples got, if I got to see what these disciples saw,
Mm-hmm.
I would, of course, follow
Mm-hmm.
this guy.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not getting to see that. I have to think that just as the standard that was now I understand Jesus says, well, I've created now a new standard, and so now henceforth the Old Testament laws don't apply. But I have to think that there is some sort of that standard that he's applying then that was interpreted by those then, that interpretation is going to be different in different times, and hence even that is not going to be totally constant throughout time. Like there is going to be new standards that pop up in new times because interpretations of the word are going to change.
Hmm.
um I have to think
Hmm.
anyways. um bu- 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 I feel like there was something I was going to mention. um all right. Yeah, anyways, so altogether, I found reading John pretty great, actually. I actually enjoyed it a lot more than I thought it would.
Hmm.
It's a lot more enjoyable to read than the Old Testament. It's clearly newer.
Yeah.
Clearly. It's clearly like a more fleshed out kind of story. There's lots of really cool symbolism. Um,
I'm glad you read it, and thank you for taking the time. Not anyone that I would talk to that isn't a Christian would take time to read the Bible. So that's thank you for doing that.
yeah, I never actually had before. And after doing it, I think I definitely have more respect for all of it than I did before.
Hmm.
Um, So, or maybe it's a respect that I guess I had intellectually before, but I have it more emotionally now, like really
Hmm.
getting to sit and grapple with it. I can see that there's so much to grapple with. Yeah, fundamentally, my thing is still like, well, all the things that are interesting about it are how open to interpretation so much of it is. And that's kind of my moral thing is that like things that are so open to interpretation, this is one of the things I'm applying when looking at these political things is if we're hating somebody because of their disagreement on some completely unanswerable philosophical question,
Right.
especially matters of interpretation of the world around us,
Hmm.
that we can't have hate for this, like
Right.
that 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 that's a non-starter
Right.
basically.
Yes.
um so my issue with that element of orthodox Christian morality, so in that sense I'm coming to this thing, okay, if I want to think of it as true in some sense, I have to use metaphors and see certain things as metaphors in order to for it to fit in with what I see as morally true.
Fair.
um
Well, and by the way, the
so
word hate, we have to be very careful about that word because the only thing we're called to hate as Christians is evil itself and sin.
yeah.
And that does not include any individuals. It says love your enemies. It says love your neighbors. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, etc. So hate is very specifically reserved for just that which is evil and does not extend to image bearers of God. So no individual should ever be hated under any circumstance.
um so is it all right if we talk about Super Smash Brothers a little?
Let's talk about Smash. Let's do it.
Yeah. um So right now, um, there's a lot of controversy. For the last 3, 4 years, there's been a pretty big shift in terms of the general ethical bounds in the community. Um, it seems as if that cultural shift started in it was mid 2020 when there was this kind of Me Too movement, and that kind of kick started a lot of things.
Hmm.
Um, uh, so right now there are quite a lot of Christians who feel like they don't really fit in the Smash community. They can't really say what they think or feel.
Right.
And there's a lot of people that aren't Christians that are saying, well, just don't say anything hateful and
Mm-hmm.
there won't be any problems. And then there's Christians who are like, well, I would never say anything hateful because I don't hate. And then there's some people that are Christians that then say stuff that, well, it still sounds hateful. And then the other people are seeing these hateful things and, well, um there's so many directions to go in.
Yeah.
So okay, that's my little summary kind of a this is a highly charitable perspective towards the Christians. I'm trying to be like
Yeah.
maximally charitable towards the Christians, but I'm also trying not to be like totally uncharitable to the other side. One of the difficulties is we don't have. There's clearly, literally, like two sides in this political divide in the Melee community. But it's totally decentralized. There's not a representative for either side,
Right.
and there's not a name for these movements, so it's really hard. It makes the vocabulary hard to talk about.
Yes.
In my head, I call one side the ban everyone everywhere people, and then the other side is like ban no one nowhere.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I
because
guess
that's kind of
this is what I find interesting about these two factions you're talking about is they seem to be loosely separated by political lines. So I don't.
yeah,
It's hard to put it in like terms of. It's certainly not atheist versus Christian. That's certainly not
absolutely.
the divide. The divide's a lot more about
It's way more
ideology. It's way more about what you think about uh, certain.
political issues.
Yeah, it's very political, and so one of my thoughts around it is I don't find a great place in either camp personally, and I've never talked about it before. But and there's a reason for that is if you start to talk about it, you get grouped into one of the two camps. And I feel like
Yeah, yeah,
most reasonable people would be unhappy getting grouped into one of the two camps, but for now they're sort of putting up with it to continue playing this game that they like. Like, I think most reasonable people, at least in the scene, want to play the game, and they want to be around people that also like playing the game, and they want to focus on the game, and that's it. But at somewhere along the way, some kind of cultural, I don't know what to call it, cultural Marxism or something has kind of like crept into it. I don't really know what to call it, neo-Marxism, where it's, hey, here's how things are. We're going to play this game, and we're only going to put up with people that are confined to think this certain way about things. And then, of course, you have the explosive reaction to people that are vehemently against those things. They get banned, whatever, and they have this kind of this inverse cultural reaction, which is, hey, everything that this larger community stands for, we're against. And it's not really about what they think; it's more about what they don't think.
it's reactionary.
It's reactionary, yes. And so
Yes.
you have, by almost necessity of what's emerged, just two polar opposite. I don't even know if it's polar opposite. It's just two
Yeah. Yeah.
clashing
Yeah.
groups, and they can't be
Yeah.
friends. Like from the rules they've set up for themselves. So it's very awkward if you have people you know in both camps that you like
Yeah.
to spend time with or whatever or associate
Yeah.
with.
Um.
Do you feel like that's a fair characterization? Is there anything in there where you're like, I don't really
Yeah, it's fair
think?
enough. Well, what I'll say is, well, yeah, none of it's going to be exactly how I would describe myself, but again, all of it I completely see that's how why you would see it that way. And I'll say there's going to be a lot of people who hear that perspective and they're really, really not going to agree with that perspective.
Right.
Um, so as far as Marxism, I do think that there actually is a Marxist part of it. I don't think that that's nearly all of it. I think
Mm-hmm.
that there are. I think. I kind of think of it like a Venn diagram. A lot of political movements actually are basically like they have different constituencies and they have to meld these constituencies together somehow. So there is a constituency of people that are quite left, that are left. So I'm a liberal. I'm a liberal and I vote for Democrats. I'm like a so like I love Joe Biden. Like Joe Biden is like I think you know he's a good guy. I think he preaches a lot of really great values. I like liberalism. There might be policies here or there I don't agree with. So, for example, I'm one of the rare young people that voted for Joe Biden in the Democratic primaries. um, uh, and then there's like left. So I'm like center left as a Joe Biden, but then there's like left people. So there's a big constituency of that.
Yes.
And then among that, there's a racial constituency, there's a purely like left constituency, which has to do with stuff like class and stuff, class and general Marxist stuff. And then so there's this racial part that doesn't necessarily have to do with Marxism, but they're kind of allying with Marxists for maybe reasons that make sense. And then there's also this the trans rights activism.
Right.
And those three, I think, are the big three like political ideas on the other side that are being used to kind of uh, inform the decisions about the way the community should be. Um,
Right.
and so you can be good on two of them and not on one of them, and you're still screwed.
Right.
Um, uh, yeah. So I think it's not just Marxism. I think that there is a Marxist bend, but not all of them are Marxists.
Right. Agreed.
Uh, yeah. Um,
Heads up, there's a
uh,
commercial break in about 25 seconds. So,
oh yeah. Actually, then let's take that. I could use a restroom break. Give
okay,
me
great.
just a moment.
Yeah, let's do
I'll be
that.
right back.
Meanwhile, we can chat. Lysile Hyde, how's it going? Yeah, well, that's certainly the goal, is being respectful and just having a good conversation. Yeah, exactly, Carl. I would characterize that as tribalism as well. Um, Not everything is black and white. It depends on what dimension you're talking about. Some things are black and white. Some things aren't black and white. I think it often happens when a people with similar beliefs populate a space. Not only will it become insular, but whoever has the power in the social space will also lean towards booting anyone who doesn't fit in. It depends on that culture. I think some cultures lend themselves more to that than others. Sweden official, welcome. I'm trying to see if Major Guile has anything to say, because I'm looking for subs here that can chat during the break. Mr. Mystic Shorts is not a sub, but love the stream. Thank you, Neo. I really appreciate that. But you see that you were doing right. The heart is that you're rejecting God himself. By rejecting God, he exists. How can you go to heaven and have communication with him entirely? Exactly, Mr. Mystic Shorts. That's an excellent point. I completely agree with that. Promoting tolerance can mitigate that a lot. I mean, I suppose it depends on what you mean by tolerance as well, because any safe community worth their salt would have a level of intolerance for certain things, activities, etc. It's not clear where that line is, and that's, I think, where a lot of the issues come up. But when it comes to like thought policing, right? So it'd be more like, we can't accept people that believe this way about something completely unrelated to Smash. Then that's where it's like, why are we doing things like that? What aspects are black and white to me? Certain things like morality is black and white. Like, there are just things that are evil and there are things that are good, and then any degradations therein are just simply a matter of either lack of information, lack of knowledge, or something like that. You're pro censorship generally to some degree. I don't like reaching into someone's life. Right. So, yeah, like the word discrimination gets a bad rap, right? But anyone that has a rational brain would acknowledge that they discriminate to make decisions every day, all the time. And it doesn't mean like racial discrimination, which very often is associated with the word discriminatory or discrimination. But for example, if I am going to buy a new tech product, I'm going to discriminate against brands I don't think are high quality. And I'm going to, that's not a morally, that's amoral, right?
So just
Oh, hey.
also I saw a comment about censorship. Um, oh man, there's so many different layers here. There's a lot of different things I really have a problem with the mainstream community. Um, so with regards to our conversation we're having so far, I think the biggest one that's related is the needing to profess similar beliefs about freaking completely unanswerable metaphysical questions.
Or
Um,
unrelated or
oh,
unanswerable.
absolutely. Yeah, totally
Yeah.
unrelated. Absolutely unrelated. But ultimately unanswerable, I think is sufficient.
Hmm.
Um, I don't think. Um, so regarding gender, 60% of Americans believe that gender is defined by sex at birth. Um, I'm a big believer in religious freedom. It's like a really fundamental idea to me, and and I think that how you define and perceive the world around you is kind of what constitutes your religious beliefs. Like what metaphysically makes a person to you is, I think, ultimately a religious belief, even if you're an atheist. Um, and so I wouldn't ever expect everyone to agree on this. I don't think it's I, and it wouldn't even have to be 60% of people. Even the fact that it's a majority of America that has this belief that seemingly is not allowed in the Smash community. Um, Even if it was a much smaller portion, I don't think it could be an almost minuscule portion. I don't think it would be right to discriminate against them. And Well, I arrive at this for the same reason. I mean, growing up, I was a gay rights activist, trans rights activist. I like trans people. In fact, I like trans people in real life. I like them. I like them. Like, I think there's a lot I haven't come with them. I've dated trans people. I really. However, there's a kind of philosophical movement around it that I don't like. Um, uh, and its intersection with Smash. Yeah, the need to basically accept something, or else you're defined as hateful, I think is fundamentally like for the same issue that I had with Christianity. I find it really problematic that your mere beliefs about the world you see around you have moral weight. Like I think this is philosophically fallacious. It fails David Hume, the is ought distinction, descriptions about the way things are versus the way they ought to be, and I might conflate the way things ought to be with what is good and what is bad. Um, and
Totally.
so I don't think a description of how you framework around how you view the world, I don't think is moral or immoral. I think it could lead you. I think certain frameworks are more or less likely to lead you to immoral or moral conduct. Hence, I believe that the rules need to be around conduct. Um, they need to be around conduct. We're talking about rules for tournaments, people at tournaments. So they need to be built around conduct at tournaments. So I think in terms of how much freedom of self-expression you have at a tournament, I think can be reasonably limited. Um, just with I think there's arguments to be made, but in terms of like the idea that you can say something about a philosophical belief you have on your internet blog, and now people get to say that they don't feel safe next to you in person. I don't think that I don't think that's good. And also, I don't think it's true. I don't think people really feel unsafe because of what they, maybe in a manner of speaking, they feel uncomfortable. But but I think the safety language is highly abusive. I think it's used as a pretense to do all sorts of like really abusive stuff. I don't think that the system is empathetic. I think what for a long time was very upsetting for me was how vindictive the justice system in Melee is. Um, so this the birth of this movement kind of started in 2020 with the Me Too stuff alongside the Black Lives Matter movement. And I supported the Black Lives Matter movement, which basically the core idea had to do with unfair sentencing, unfair treatment under the law. It didn't say that all the people who were arrested didn't do that stuff. It said the way we're treating these people is unfair and discriminatory, and particularly as it intersects with race. Um, this is really meaningful to me personally. I grew up basically. I have an older brother. He's 6 years older than me. When I was um, 8, he was arrested and taken away. He was my best friend. He was taken away into the criminal justice system, and he was in and out of the criminal justice system for the next 15, 16 years. So I've spent multiple Christmases in the waiting room of juvenile hall. My parents went to visit him. And then as an adult, I've spent a lot of time in prisons, not as a prisoner, but visiting as a visitor. Um, And so the idea of finding love for people, even if, and my brother did all that stuff. He did all that stuff. That said, the punishments can be severe and abusive and so on. So in terms of criminal justice, I have a real like fundamental. Oh, this is my sweet and beautiful girlfriend handing me some wonderful Soylent. Um, it's very important to me, and I thought that all the principles that we were appealing to under with like Black Lives Matter, I think that I find it totally bizarre when as soon as some of these people actually have some power, they basically become the most vindictive and angry and cruel givers of punishment ever. And then they'll make these arguments that like, well, but it's just a video game, it's not like the law, like it's not the law that they're breaking, like you can exclude anyone from a tournament for any reason. And I think it's like the law is the way it is for principled reasons, like it's to fulfill a purpose. So yes, they aren't breaking the law some of the time, though I do think some of the stuff that's happened recently is probably actually illegal. um uh there's underlying principles that go into justice. And so justice, I think, is beyond a moral system. It's like, how do we as a society, it's a group activity. How do we as a society uh, dispense justice fairly? And a huge component, just such a massive, just a humongous component of dispensing justice fairly is how do you fairly and responsibly and empathetically deal with people who really did it? They did their thing.
Right.
How do you handle that? And then how do you discern whether people did it? What are the principles that go into a fair trial, so to
Hmm.
speak? Um, so all the people saying like, "Oh no, it's fine that we do trial by Twitter ratio because like it's like just up to tournaments to decide who they want, who they don't want." It's just so bizarre the intersection of like that's so anti-BLM, it's so anti-Marxist to just say let these private corporations just decide. Like thankfully we have corporate power here. We can just do whatever we want now that we have corporate power. It's so against the underlying principles they're supposed to have. And it seems like they're just happy to have some um the power to enforce, what they think and what they
Hmm.
want. And I don't know, it's all just very upsetting. It's all very upsetting.
Yeah. And as someone that like I never sought to like join the Smash scene and then like be in this position where we're talking about what
Politics, yeah.
what weird political influences have, you know, kind of made themselves manifest. And so now that we're sort of forced in this position, I guess there's a few things that I would say in general about it is number one, like I wish there are you have communication with people one on one, and that is the most ideal way to get like what we're doing right now. It's public in a sense because it's being broadcast, but in terms of like sharing ideas and things, that's most best done on a one-on-one situation. If you're forced in a position where you have to make a proclamation to a group, that doesn't necessarily lend itself to very understanding or empathetic or helpful dialogue, and from what I've observed, and I think there's a lot of pressure to say and act a certain way in that situation, whereas on one-on-one situation you wouldn't feel that pressure and you'd be more authentic and you'd kind of be more genuine and all those sorts of things. So that's one component of it. And the other one is just simply,
Twitter.
sure, yeah, if you want to use Twitter, but
The Twitter. We're on Twitter and it is optimized for people to just like get really angry and to say things that infuriate as many people as possible and to rile up people that we're organizing on Twitter. It prevents. So that's why one reason I want to have these conversations is it actually
right,
promotes talking. I think the talking actually
yeah,
is the cure here.
I
Anyways, I'm
think it
sorry
is.
to cut in.
That's okay.
Yes, that was one. So what's your, yeah, continue.
Yeah, and I think that that's a fair. Twitter gets a lot of bad rep for that sort of behavior, but I also don't think Twitter has to be that way. To be totally honest with you,
Hmm. Yeah, I
um,
agree.
but anyway, that's sort of a side point. Um, Man, I kind of lost my train of thought.
Sorry for getting in.
That's okay. That's okay. Uh, I guess this is what I would say. Um, I would love to live in a world where, um, people that feel differently about, as you put it, unanswerable perhaps questions, or just questions that are so unrelated to Smash, can come together, play a game they enjoy. And I'm not that. I mean, you were a formerly ranked Puff player. I'm not even ranked at all. I just like the game, and I like the community, and I like a lot of the stuff surrounding it. I would love to just play with people that maybe I don't agree with or that I do. And I don't think it's as simple as, oh, well, you just can't say anything hateful, because then you get into like, well, what do you mean by hateful, and what do you mean by you can't say it? And that's where things get really dicey, and that's probably where this division has started. And I don't even know if I'm willing to or even comfortable getting into that, because I don't have the answers for everything. But broadly speaking, I just wish there was more appetite for A, more thoughts, more conversations, and then B, not having a gut reaction like to be inflammatory and to like say things that are provocative for the sake of controversy. I don't understand that at all. I think that's for some reason the addiction everyone has. It's like, well, I'm gonna like just say something to really piss everyone off. It's like, well, what, you know, what would own them a lot more if you care about that, is if you say something kind to them and you say something nice, because then they look like they're mean for no reason, and then you can completely dissolve something that would have otherwise escalated. But I also,
that is the platform.
But there's a push and pull there between
really
that.
It's very difficult to do that.
There's a push and pull between that and then the need to express the truth. I think truth is like the most important thing that there is, and I think having the tools to be able to arrive at the truth for yourself, but then also impart truth onto others, is very important. And since, as you articulated with reading the Book of John, that's becoming more obvious. And I think I think it's sad that some people feel like they can't speak the truth to people because they feel like they'll be punished for it. And in my opinion, that's like a spiritual presence, in my opinion, of a plan of attack to obfuscate the truth. It's like, let's create a really controlled situation with, we can censor things, and then also let's pick out things that are explicitly Christian in concept, and then say either this is off limits or you just can't flat out say these things. And that's how I feel, without getting too specific on a lot of these things.
Yeah. Sorry, 1 second. This cat is very excited, and it's not compatible with a careful conversation. Let me get this cat out of the room. 1 sec.
No problem. That's how you divide other than come together. Right. Well, sometimes that's really interesting. If you're being divisive for divisive sake, that's bad. But sometimes a division has to happen for certain things.
I had to cast her out into exile. She was being hateful.
What was her name?
Nelly.
Nelly?
It's Canelita, like in Spanish. But
oh,
Nelly
nice.
for the white people like me.
Appreciate it. Here's an attempt at a parallel. Someone can be a vegetarian and be uncomfortable in the presence of someone eating meat, but I do not think it's fair to bar non-vegetarians from eating meat because it makes vegetarians uncomfortable. Yeah. That's a decent parallel, I think.
Yeah, unless maybe it's like a vegan convention.
Right. Excellent parallel. Yeah. Here's another thing to say is, like, as a believer myself in Christianity, I have certain what the community would consider to be radical views, and so I don't expect that the cultural sentiment would be warm to my ideas of certain things, and B, I'm not expecting to like ever enter into those discussions. Like, as soon as during the Me Too stuff, I said, hey guys, I don't know, I kind of feel like having a lot of alcohol around underage people maybe wasn't a good thing.
That's like literally the whole thing. Is just people getting like,
it's just having drinking,
consciously inebriated in public,
yes,
and then seeing what happens.
And I had people saying things like dude,
a lot of bad stuff happens.
They're like, dude, I knew there's something I didn't like about you, so I'm just gonna unfollow you. And I was like, well, okay, like I don't. So there are certain things that I would consider to be supremely obvious, supremely basic things that if I were to apparently make those things known, that is like the most unforgivable thing to say ever. And like I picked what I consider to be the most tame, obvious thing, and drinking around underage people, and apparently that was horrible. So as soon as I kind of got a taste of that, I went, okay, what is going on? I joined Smash Melee probably like 2011, 2012, the competitive scene, and I started playing Melee in 2001. Loved it from the start, but like it was completely different. We didn't delve into this stuff. And
Yeah.
but the sad part is there was probably a lot of nonsense going on because young people do stupid things, but it wasn't this weird. It wasn't this double standard. And right now, the biggest problem I'm seeing right now is double standards for how people are treated, double standards for just their own rules and policies that they enforce, and it just really bothers me, and I don't like it. And then on
Yeah.
the reactionary side, I don't like how they're approaching. It's sort of like they don't care about Melee anymore. They just want they just want like the main scene to burn. So it's like when Nintendo put out all the new restrictions for tournaments, they're like, yeah, like stick it to them. Nintendo's pro Christ or whatever. And I was like, are you actually out of your minds? This has nothing to do with that. And also, by the way, more restrictions is means less free speech and it means more discrimination for all the things that you hold dear. So I don't think this is a champion for you. Sorry to break it to you.
Actually, I do. I think Nintendo may be the savior for this. I
Wow.
think League of Legends may be the savior for this.
How is that possible?
Well, um, some of these rulings really probably are violating religious liberty. And so if you can get a successful lawsuit and then you show it to Nintendo, Nintendo actually might be able to change things. I don't know. It's an avenue I think that could be explored, but it's not explored from people who just want to burn it down. This was my
Correct.
experience talking to the Mana Monthly, and this is why ultimately I called it prison. Is that they aren't trying to break out. They're fine having their thing off to the side, and as well, I think that that's fine.
Right.
Um, but they aren't looking to change the community. They don't want to be a part of the community anymore. I understand why, but I do. I feel like the community is supposed to be for smashers who play the game. That's all it's supposed to be. I play the game, so
Yes.
I belong.
Yes.
I'm by definition I belong. Um, uh, but I don't feel like I belong for sure. I definitely don't feel like I belong.
I feel the same way.
Yeah, and so so in terms of fighting back, and Nintendo gives a big that's an avenue to explore. Um, I yeah. In any case,
I don't know. Technicals talks quite a bit about man, if only why is Smash so obsessed with grassroots? They always shoot themselves in the foot by focusing on grassroots. They should work with Nintendo. And in my experience, every step of the way, when folks have worked with Nintendo, maybe with the
yeah,
huge exception of like what Panda was trying to do and
yeah.
Dr. Allen and all that, it has always been a complete laughably bad or just
Hmm.
didn't work out, fizzled out, or suppression or whatever. And like the Project M side of things is a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
And so, but anyway, all that to say, every Nintendo has different interests and goals with Smash than the Smash scene does. It doesn't matter how much you force them to work together; they're never going to see eye to eye on things, and there's always going to be issues there, as far as I can tell. And so, I don't think that Nintendo would really help the grassroots scene. And that doesn't mean that I think grassroots is going to be successful. I don't know. I don't know about that. I don't know that it's going to be
Yeah,
good.
no, it may not help the grassroots scene, but if the grassroots scene is like violating our rights, then maybe we actually need an adult to step in and say like, stop. Someone with
That's
power
the
to say stop.
sentiment. That's the sentiment from
Yeah.
I won't say technical specifically because I won't put his words in his mouth, but folks that agree with that idea of, man, if Smash would just clean up their act and become adults and like work with Nintendo, then all this would go away. And
I know I'm skeptical that all this would go away. I am skeptical that all this would go away, but even still, I don't think yeah, I don't think it's going to suddenly be great with Nintendo's involvement. I'm more saying that that I think that a lot of people really do have a claim to being religiously discriminated against, and an avenue of self-protection, I think, is Nintendo using the law. I think
interesting.
that some of these restrictions, I don't know if so. I don't. If your evidence for banning somebody is their view on a metaphysical construct like gender, I think that that actually is. So if it's harassing people, then of course you have a legitimate reason to ban. Um, and that's why. So the rules that I advocate for are conduct based. So conduct at tournaments, and then when it comes to conduct outside of tournaments, We shouldn't be banning people for their social media. The platforms have, by and large, with some exceptions, and I'll lay out the exceptions. Um, the platforms have the tools to remove people you don't want to see on them for yourself. You actually can cultivate. If you don't want to
Yes.
see what these people are saying, you can block them. You can remove those things you don't like. Um, uh, um, but if people aren't allowed to express their feelings, that's a lot of why what we mostly see when people do express it is the most angry people who end up saying hateful stuff. But there's a huge amount of people who actually just feel like they can't say anything. And then the people
Yes.
that are going to break through, there's a selection where they're going to be the angriest. But
Yes.
there are a lot of like very moderate people who really feel like they can't talk about anything and they have to keep
Yes.
quiet.
Yes. And what's
Um,
interesting is once the floodgates open, then they become more instantiated and like beyond what they probably originally thought because they're like, well, I'm just gonna
yeah,
like become this now. This is my
yeah.
identity, and
You
it's
said I
so
am
weird.
this. Yeah, you said I am this, then I will be if I really
Yeah,
yeah.
it's really
Uh
strange. So a lot of people have DM'd me, not a lot, a handful of people have DM'd me and said, "Hey, I know I made a few videos, somewhat recently that kind of address some core things because I go, look, in the future, if someone asks me some question and I don't answer the way that they want, and someone blows something I say out of proportion, I want like 5 or 6 core 5-minute videos that state plainly what I think about the most important things. I have videos like." You mentioned casting the first stone. That is one of the videos I made about
mm,
cancellation and cancel culture. Is
mm,
simply if you're quick to cancel someone, first consider things that you maybe have done that you're not proud of, and then imagine a world where you're found out for the thing that you did, and then think about casting the first
yeah,
stone.
yeah,
The
yeah.
other one is you'll change your mind in 10 years from now. The things that you hold dear, the things that you really care
Yeah.
about now, they're not going to be the same in 10 years. And if they are the same as they were 10 years ago, I feel sorry for you. That is a bad thing. Um, the other point I made is something like love being of the most important thing that there is. Loving your enemy, loving your neighbor. There's not a higher calling than that. And then I have one on like the sanctity of human life. Like every human life is inherently valuable, and we should act that way and treat each other that way. So like videos like that, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put these out there. So in a couple years, when someone wants to take me down and take my platform down, I'll
Yeah.
say this is what I meant, and then I don't know if that's gonna do anything, but it felt good to make those videos because it felt like an opportunity to just like state something very clearly and concisely that I think is important. And that's what we've been able to do here, not concisely at all. And
Yeah.
that's one of the lovely things about just like kind of rambly conversations. We can kind of go in all
Yeah.
these directions, and I appreciate that. But I also just really I feel like this is a missing piece in the scene where you can't really talk about
I
stuff
do
like
think
this.
so. I think that we need a platform where people can genuinely share ideas. Now, one of the things this is what I where I lost my train of thought a couple minutes ago. You'd said
Okay.
something. Um, that other side does not want to talk about stuff. They don't. They are anti-discussion.
Yeah.
They're anti-discourse.
Yes.
Um, uh, I have reached out to so many left people, and they won't talk. They won't talk. A few will talk privately.
Mm-hmm.
A few will talk privately
Yeah.
because they don't want to get blown up for talking publicly.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Which, to be
so
fair,
all
that
the
if as
understandable,
someone in
but
their camp, they are still at risk. No one is safe.
yeah.
No one is safe.
And that's why also when the mob is like, well, you don't have anything to really be scared of if you don't say anything hateful. It's gaslighting. Like
Yes.
obviously there is a chilling effect right now on speech in the community, and hence no one will talk outside of their 240 character tweet that they intend to get a bunch of likes and really dunk on somebody. Nobody wants to talk outside of that context. The only people that are willing to talk thus far are super right-leaning people, and this is I shouldn't say super right-leaning people, but people who aren't in that side. And it's because, well, they feel squished down and like they have no voice. They're like, please, 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 anybody talk to me. I can't be heard by anyone. Um, and yeah, the other side is not interested in conversation. Like it's actually shocking how hard it is to get anyone on that side to actually use their voice to say what they supposedly believe. Um, it's a big, uh, well, it's a big cult red flag. It's a really big red flag when no one will talk what they think.
Yeah.
outside of having their big group behind them. Um, so I think one of the major things that's to be done is, yeah, developing platforms in which people actually do share ideas. Eventually, they will have to, like, if there is, because the other thing is there's an appetite for viewing these things. There
Yeah,
actually is an appetite for this.
there is.
Unfortunately, I'm like not the kind of person who can make a great platform that's gonna view a bunch of people. I would love if the people who have slightly larger platforms hosted things like debates and stuff. There's such a huge, there's a lot, to be honest, there's a lot of money to be gained covering Smash politics in a discourse way. There
Hmm.
is an appetite to watch it. People would view this sort of thing.
That's very
Um,
interesting. I certainly would.
yeah, yeah. A lot of these people would, and and eventually they would have to stand up for themselves. If we actually created a, I mean, I'm a liberal. I think if we create a free marketplace of ideas where things, then a lot of that would be fixed. A lot of the really awful bans that go through, they go through because there actually is no discourse about them. With the hack stuff, it's pretty crazy that he can put out like a video saying like Leffen used his audience to harass a documentarian into censoring his documentary from talking about his crime. And everyone says, well, he faced that crime, so it's fair game or whatever. Like that's 10 years old stuff. And it's like, it's not. It's like 3 years old stuff. He said 3 years ago that, you know, he shouldn't have been banned. And he 3 years ago mass harassed someone making a documentary about it to cover it up, and successfully did it. And then everyone refusing to engage with that. Basically,
Right.
the only response is, sorry, hacks, you're a schizo. Everything you're saying is totally schizophrenic and
Yeah.
delusional. We're not going to engage on any point because that
Hmm.
would be harassing Leffen.
Right.
If any of these people were actually in a conversation with another person who had the opportunity to rebut their ideas, it would be so patently obvious to an audience that it's insane. The
Yeah.
gaslighting is only possible. This like intense mass gaslighting is only
Hmm.
possible because there's no conversation.
Right. One thing
Um,
that was helpful in that specific instance is Samox shed some light on that, where he mentioned that he also removed part of the evidence.zip part because one of the individuals interviewed requested that he remove that part as well. So it wasn't just
individual requested that they remove it because of the negative attention that individual was getting.
sure.
That is not it is it's shoot, disculpatory. I'm misusing the word or mispronouncing it. That does not, like, you can't just harass your victims until they ask to get your stuff removed.
Correct.
That's exactly as bad. It
Right.
Samox posted that in thinking that it actually like cleared up the issue, and it didn't. It made it worse. It makes it clearly
Interesting.
worse.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, when I watched the first videos that Hacks made, like it's funny. Like let's say he was completely crazy and he was completely delusional about Leffen, and Leffen didn't do any of those things. I still know people in the Smash scene that are like that. I still know
Yeah.
the Dark Triad complex people, the
Yeah.
narcissist people. I know people like that, and also I can empathize with the fact that if there's somebody in the scene who's more popular and they manifest these traits in a way that is only known to you, how deeply upsetting that is. Um,
Yeah.
and at some point, you'd want to tell the story. Now, again, I'm not saying Hacks was all right. I don't know all the details. It seems like there was some merit to what he was saying. But what's so concerning to me is how that whole thing was done. It took 2 years for the TOs to do anything. They still didn't do anything. And then 3 days after Hacks like wanted to make a little video that kind of recapped all the events, and then they go, well, he signed something that said he wouldn't talk about it. I'm like, well, that's insane.
That's insane. That's insane. And sure, he signed something saying he wouldn't talk about it, but the thing he signed didn't say, should you talk about it, instant permanent ban.
Yeah,
People keep pointing that up. Again, this is one of those things that it doesn't hold up in a conversation. It holds
right.
up when you have 240 characters and you can just zip at someone and be like, hey, well, he broke the rules, so what are you going to do? And then you get 800 likes and you totally ratio the other guy.
Yeah,
But as in, one rebuttal is, okay, but the TOs made a judgment there. They still
yeah.
made a subjective judgment to permanently ban based on this,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is extreme and crazy and abusive.
Right.
So it's not like they had to do this. There's nothing about it that they had to do. I understand that politically they had to do it, but that's because no one wants to stand up.
Yes.
Um, So yeah, they had to, the TOs had to, but they're all kind of part of this strange ideology where, like, it's not a surprise to me that they acted this way. If I
Right.
simulated how are they going to respond, obviously they were going to respond this way. And then a lot of people are disappointed in Hacks for acting the way he did. Like, couldn't he see
Mm-hmm.
what was going to happen? It's like, well, I can see what was going to happen too, but that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean
Right.
like you can't like that. It means to mean you can't have integrity
Mm-hmm.
and stand up for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you can't, that's another aspect of the whole trial thing that's not fair, is people can't advocate for themselves.
Right.
People often use this language of you need to change and show that you've changed. No justice system really requires that people like literally change who they are. It holds them in place
That's a
to
great
make sure they
point.
don't commit more crimes, and rehabilitation such that they don't hurt other people, sure, but it doesn't, there's no requirement that they like change their philosophical
Yeah.
beliefs or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um that's completely insane.
It is.
Um and then I think I mentioned this in my little essay. It's totally unfair that basically I've been playing Phoenix Wright. Did you ever play Phoenix Wright?
No, but my brother's a fan.
Yeah. Basically, they live in this dystopian this dystopian Japan where crime is like so bad and the justice system is like totally corrupt. Judges are all paid off. They're like the judges and prosecutors like coordinate and fake evidence all the time. There's a new law that makes it so all trials last 3 days maximum. They have to be end in 3 days. This is a game mechanic, obviously, but
Yeah. It's cool.
and people are almost always found guilty. Um, there's almost a presumption of guilt. It's all very reminiscent of all this, where basically you get called out for a thing and you have a day or two to defend yourself on against the masses. And whatever the masses decide is where we go. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, and people want to say, well, like it's not the law so anything goes. It's like, no, like we should be modeling ourselves after the things the law does right. Yes, we don't have the resources to make like a fully fledged justice system, but the idea that like the reason people get representation from lawyers is because those lawyers are like well versed in the game and can defend that person and represent them the best. We're taking a lot of people that are not totally mentally sound. A lot of these people
Right.
have mental illnesses.
Right.
A lot of these people are not totally literate. And we're making them have to defend themselves accurately in this very subtle game. And the end result of either way is they get mass harassed afterwards
Right.
forever if they fail.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, it's just completely abusive and cruel. It violates all moral principles about like forgiveness and treating people with respect.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, every time I just start thinking about it, I just start ranting because it's generally
No.
really hard to make me mad, but it just makes me so.
No, I understand what you're saying. I want to point out something that Essie said in chat. Essie's my wife. I love hearing people just talk about opinions. It really benefits both sides, since people get to flesh out their beliefs out loud, and I get to learn more points of view by having conversations where one has the desire purely to learn and not be right. It's only beneficial. Yeah, and I don't think there is some appetite for that, but certainly not enough. It's not like it's certainly we're not creating a culture that is sympathetic to that
Abusive.
viewpoint.
Yeah.
Thank you, conducive. Chillax, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I think another big problem is blaming Hacks' audience and him not 100% condemning them for not being a player for the most part. Yes, this is something that's pretty interesting. It sort of raises this broader question of if someone, like, I mean, not to get too political, but like you could even say this about like the January 6th stuff with Trump, right? To what degree is a leader responsible for the actions of his followers? And responsibility is also something that is a big left-right divide issue, where it's and correct me if I'm wrong if you feel differently, but I think people on the left feel there's a tremendous responsibility for a leader to like collect their followers and be responsible for them. On the right, they don't feel that way as much, and that I think that plays into this as well.
I think right now there's a left-right divide. I think though that the belief in how responsible your audience needs to be, how responsible you are for your audience, I think it kind of depends. I think on I think actually, basically, when the leader is really irresponsible, all the people in there say it doesn't matter. I think that what you're talking about is a symptom of the right's main champion being Donald Trump, who is
That could
clearly
be.
not. very responsible. It used to be that Republicans were very like the right was very concerned with this sort of thing.
Yeah,
The left
that's
was
true.
less so. I think that yeah, so I think that's kind of almost a convenience thing.
That could be. Yeah.
Um,
But like I guess with
uh,
hacks, like I guess what like you know,
but
I
it's
I
totally
am
inconsistent.
I am
Leffen
sure.
and Mango are completely not held to any standard whatsoever about what their followers end up doing. None of them are responsible for what they're doing. Like, like you're allowed to just call the people in the Mana Monthly pedophiles, and somehow you're not responsible for if those guys end up getting death threats.
Right.
But hacks by saying that Leffen tried to get a documentary uh censored, which he did successfully, that he is somehow instigating harassment against Leffen.
Right.
Um, well, yeah, one of the things is I think a lot of the people on that side don't believe in narcissists. They don't believe a narcissist is a real thing.
Yes. Yes.
And a lot of people who are caught in the narcissist's delusion, who are like living the narcissist delusion, are the are don't believe in narcissism.
Correct.
Um, but so that's part of what I think freaks people out when they see the stuff about Leffen is people who see narcissists, they see that and like, how can you guys not see it? This guy is like an incredible narcissist. Like if you had a definition of narcissism, he fulfills it. Like he's probably literally like a cluster B narcissist. I can't exactly diagnose him, but
Hmm.
um and that's also not to call him an evil person. Narcissists can do a lot of good things. Obviously,
Hmm.
like I think actually the community has done a decent job creating boundaries for the most part around Leffen so that his raging narcissism minimizes harm and allows his Leffen to still flourish. I think we've failed for a lot of other players to create clear and fair
Hmm.
and kind boundaries around them.
Right.
Um, so
I,
this is a place where my experience running a tutoring center is very
hmm.
relevant. Um, so I was unschooled, which means when I see kids in school get disciplined, a lot of it is just insanely abusive to me. It just seems totally cruel that you've got kids who are not meant to be really sitting in a chair for 8 hours a day, failing to do so, and then we drug them up, and then we yell at them, and we make them feel little and small and weak.
Right.
And so when I took over the center, well, my radical empathy has caused a real cultural shift
Hmm.
in which students that are different have different rules around their conduct. The autistic kid who is, if you accommodated him correctly, he flourishes and learns a lot of great math and makes everyone's really happy to have him around. But if every time you get out of his chair, you're having to yell at him and use discipline to get him to stay in, or the ADHD kid, or or whatever, you're setting them up to fail and hurting them and hurting yourself in the space that you're in. Likewise, I think our yeah. So someone in the chat, I'm sorry, I got distracted. Someone in the chat says Leffen has gotten a lot better over the years. It's totally true. I think the community has succeeded in being relatively sympathetic, and they should. I think they should continue to be relatively sympathetic. I think we should be able to acknowledge the things he's done bad without suddenly saying, "Okay, we have to completely ban him."
Hmm.
Um,
One thing too on Leffen, I'm not claiming to know anything about Leffen. I don't know him. I don't. I'm not even saying one way or the other about him. I just think we should have the right to be able to kind of speak plainly. And I think the best case scenario is you go to the person directly. And from what I can surmise, Hacks made some level of attempt to do that. And from a biblical standpoint, if you have an issue with someone, you go to them directly, and if they won't talk to you, you grab someone else, like a trusted advisor or a close friend, you go with them. If they still won't advise you, then you have pretty much free reign to air your grievance or whatever. And so if that's what's being done, then that's what's being done. I want to address something that Poggy B is saying. Hey, been lurking for a hot minute. Thought I'd chime in as someone who I think is on your other side, assuming you mean more like on the progressive side of things. I think part is that when issues are brought up on left versus right, a political issue, there's a serious disconnect of like what would actually be genuine good faith conversation versus a pointless argument on camera for clicks. Kimball even said that conversations are better one-on-one, and I just feel more comfortable having conversations like that personally, not necessarily on camera for a stream, which can open myself up for harassment. There's certainly risk involved with publicizing broadcasts. It's one of the biggest reasons I've held off so long doing any kind of discussion. One of the reasons I pulled Drew on is I felt like he's someone I could actually converse with and we'd have a productive conversation. There are certainly people I would not pick to have a discussion with.
Suddenly, like denying the Holocaust on your stream.
I wouldn't. I mean, again, I personally speaking, I'm really open to talking to most people, genuinely, truthfully,
Yeah, yeah.
happy to. When it comes to someone I can trust to conduct themselves in a certain manner on a live stream that has a certain standard, there's a shorter list of people that I would talk to. So you raise a good point, and I think for your lay person, to go back to what Drew was saying, not everyone's a trained lawyer and can defend themselves in a court. Just that the similar way, not everyone's trained to think about culture and about anthropology and about economics and all these lofty, crazy concepts. And not everyone has to. You can just listen if you want. I've thought about this a little bit, and I've taken some classes or whatever, and I'm not fantastic about debating it, but I have some thoughts I want to share, and that's, I think, all you need to have a good conversation. But just know you are opening yourself up. So I would say to most people, just keep having one-on-one conversations and don't be afraid to have a trusted person you can talk to. But I think any idea worth having, it's a risk to share it. I think that's just a general rule. I think a good moderator can be very helpful to keep you from leaning into bad faith behavior. Good moderation can certainly help. That's a good point.
I want to the Poggy B. Kimball even said, I want to respond to this myself. Kimball even said that conversations are better one-on-one, and I just feel more comfortable having combos like that personally, not necessarily on camera for stream, which can also open myself up to harassment. Absolutely, it can open yourself up for harassment. It sucks. I think when we're talking about one thing I like about Christianity is that Jesus stood up for what he believed in, regardless of the harm that came to him. In many ways, he says almost the same thing Socrates does. They're both kind of martyr figures. Socrates dies for his right, basically, to say what he was saying. And he stands up for himself to even accept his punishment of death. They both kind of do this, although a little differently. And I find that the total paralyzing fear of harassment after you express your ideas on the left to be a cope. I think that I'll continue having these conversations privately with people and to be totally non-judgmental and to really try to see their perspective. But I can't help but think that if you're too scared to say what you're saying out loud, you're missing some kind of backbone of some kind. That said, I mean, like, if you're pretty sure you're going to get a whole bunch of really big hate and you're not ready to handle that, then like, also, I mean, I understand it, but
I think that we should just be extending grace. We should be extending grace to people left and right to think, this is what you're saying now, this is what you believe now. That could change in 10 years. And I think if everyone thought that way, because I mean, I think the first step to recognizing that is think about where you were 10 years ago. Do you feel exactly the same way as you did 10 years ago? And then using that as a baseline, and just being more empathetic. I like your approach of empathy. I think that's really important. And I think here's another thing to think about. For whatever awful thing someone did, have you ever done anything that, if you think to your past, if you're like, if that one thing gets out that I did, I would be a ruin. I would be endlessly ashamed and embarrassed. Imagine that thing being exposed. Then put yourself in that person's shoes and understand how they're behaving, what they're doing, and then what their course for recompense and forgiveness is. And if there's no pathway, you're starting to get an idea of like how maybe we should be treating people, I think.
Yeah. Okay, I feel like we've done a lot of back and forth on really broad things. But I'm kind of itching to just make it a little tougher.
Okay.
To get into a little more nitty-gritty.
I'll let you know if I'm comfortable with that or not.
Yeah, anytime. Say you don't want to answer, you can I think plead the fifth anytime. Well, one of my recommendations too is if you don't want to plead the fifth but you want to say something, just devil's advocate, just be like, well, some people on this side think this. That's a fair way to do it.
Good idea.
But Um, not that I would ever do that. Anything so sneaky.
No way.
Um,
That's the
uh,
Socratic method, man.
yeah, yeah. I actually, a huge component of teaching people how to teach is teaching the Socratic method. Um, it's kind of, well, a lot of tutoring is that. So yeah, I have to train a lot of. I have some 30 tutors that I've had to train on using the Socratic method.
Cool.
Um, um, yeah, I agree. It's kind of aggressive. Sorry, I'm reading what you said, Poggy B. Yeah, it's aggressive. I'm being aggressive intentionally. If we were in a conversation one on one, I would say it to you, but I would say it with a really nice, tone of voice. I think you should stand up for what you believe. I think that's true, and that's something I like about Christians is that I can at least appeal to them, be like, hey, you should stand up for what you think, and we should hash this out. Whereas it's frustrating that on the other side they have all these like defenses, all these like logical defenses that like basically rationalize never being challenged ever.
Well, and to double down on
Now
that,
I,
I
I
will
get it,
say,
but
to double down on that, I will say I feel I've been a coward and have had a lack of backbone for the exact reason of when I mentioned in 2020 when I said, "Oh yeah,
yeah,
underage drinking is bad." I went, "Okay, I'm not willing to have that fight. I feel very strongly about it, but I'm not willing to have that." And that's fine. You don't need to have a backbone in every
yeah,
situation. It depends on your convictions, it depends on your beliefs and like what you think is an
and your
appropriate course of
preparation,
action.
and
And
your preparation.
yes, exactly.
Your preparation. Like I also understand if someone's like, I'm not prepared to really discuss this. And also I'm scared of going into the Thunderdome. I really don't want to make a Thunderdome for Smash. It's not a Thunderdome that I want for
Yes.
sure. That's
So,
definitely not what I
what's
want.
the specific thing you said you wanted to bring up?
Oh, okay. So moving forward in Smash, um, one, um, what are the rules and bounds that make sense? What are the rules and bounds that make sense? And because we haven't fleshed this out, but in particular with certain topics. So I want to get a little bit more in the weeds on the elephant in the room, the trans issue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the second thing I want to discuss, because I know you have a hard stop at 4. So
I do.
before I don't want us to just ramble all the way and then miss this other topic. The other topic that's really important is what do we do generally, what are the tools available to us generally to try to change the culture in ways beyond just talking about it. Doing this is almost doing this, it sounds like a meme to say, but what we're doing is literally radical. It's insane, but like what we're
Yes.
doing actually is a radical act of actually talking about all this. It's shocking that it just doesn't make sense that there's tens of thousands of players and there actually is not a platform where people are talking about this stuff. There is no platform where people are talking about this stuff.
Right.
It's crazy. It's actually mind-boggling how many
Yes.
people there are in the Smash community and how there isn't a platform where people are with different ideas actually exchanging them. So
I'll speak.
so first one was I want to get into the nitty gritty on exactly what are the bounds and how what we want to do, because I think also we need a fleshed out answer to that to then get to number 2, where do we go?
Right. Well, it's tough with language. Maybe I'll just speak more broadly about how I feel about language. Because I don't know that I have a perfect answer for how to deal with things like individuals who feel, gender pronouns need to be a certain way or not. I don't have that answer. But what I can say is, for those who feel very strongly about words and their meanings, it is difficult to get people to come on board and control their speech, and that's the words that they will use. I need to be able to use my free speech, and then of course the other side will say, well, you're saying things that you're sort of like what's the phrase?
Dog
You're
whistling.
what's that?
Dog whistling, maybe?
No, I'm looking for like you're denying their existence by speaking in
Yeah.
a way that's unfavorable to them. So that's kind of where the heart of the debate is. And so I don't really know how you fix that, to be totally honest with you. Um,
I have a
but
whole framework for this. When you say your butt, and then I have a whole framework, I have the solution. I am
okay,
the man
okay.
with the. But
I'll
yeah,
I'll
go
hear
ahead
a
with your
solution. I probably won't even say if I agree with it or not because I've been thinking about this a lot and it's a difficult situation. Um, so all that to say, we have to find some kind of compromise where regardless of how you feel about the relationship between sex and gender, and regardless of how you feel about the words' meanings, you should be able to play the same game together. That's what I'll say on that, and then I'll let you give your solution.
I think where I think almost the start of all this for me was I did an interview almost 2 years ago now with a rookie, and my sense from talking to him was that he shouldn't really have been banned. I didn't think that. Now I would get into the specifics with anyone about it. There was a sexual misconduct claim that he disputes, and there's some reasonable reasons to kind of go back and forth on that. In any case, even if all of it were totally true, the particular misconduct there was doesn't cross the red line of anything that lanes like I think permanent exile, and was probably used as a pretense to ban him. A lot of it is like pretense, where you're found to have like wrongthink, and then the Eye of Sauron is watching you until you do something, which can be used to as pretense to actually ban you. So he had the Eye of Sauron on him for a while. People have been talking about banning him, and then but they didn't really have the something firm enough. So the motivation for banning him is the transphobia thing, and at least when I at the time I had interviewed him, um, he had not said anything that was concretely hateful. At least there was no documentation of it. He had said primarily statements of his faith and his view of the world. And my understanding is he had not misgendered any trans people, which that's one of the big like sins in this space. That's one of the big major sins that basically you have to apologize for if you do. And the apologies for this, there's not much room given on how you apologize for it. So you're not really allowed to apologize and say, like, I'm sorry for hurting you with what I said, and I'm not going to phrase those things that way. However, I still have an internal view that kind of agrees with that, but I'm gonna censor what I say from now on.
Mm-hmm.
That's not saying it's acceptable, and
Right.
hence the underlying thing you have to change is your beliefs about the world, which isn't totally fair.
Right.
So what really started me on this path was like I think that it should be possible to have a community in which it should be possible to have a tournament that can have trans people and a rookie at it. It should be possible. Now, I don't know if maybe he said some other bigger sins since. A lot of what happens is people get cast away and then they maybe get a little more unhinged. I have no idea if he said something worse in the 2 years since, but I know at the time he had already been banned for almost 2 years, and there hadn't been any majorly documented sins of that kind then. I think it's kind of unfair also when we have unfair trials of people and then people freak out in response to how unfairly they were treated. And then their freak out is used as evidence that they haven't changed. That's one of the abusive things. For example, I think that happened with no flexes to a great degree. The initial treatment of him was not fair. What he did stuff that it deserved, some uh, criticism. But the treatment wasn't fair, and then he freaked out for months and months and months about how unfair the treatment was, and that was used as evidence of like, yeah, see how bad he has to go. Um, okay, in any case, so I wanted to say that my initial thing here was that yes, I believe it's got to be possible to have all these people together. I'm almost taking that as a premise to just like that it must be possible. This unity, it must be possible to have. And what I found halfway through talking to a rookie was that like 2 hours in, we ended up talking about something related to like evolution. I found out that he's a young Earth creationist. Like, are you?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm sitting there trying to convince him of like trans people, and he like doesn't even believe the dinosaurs exist. And so
Interesting.
it's like,
Uh,
or I don't know if he doesn't believe the dinosaurs exist, but in
yeah.
any case, it's like, what hope do I have? Like
Sure.
we're in such opposite universes of
Yeah,
viewing
I
the
get your
world
point.
that
In a very short sentence, though, the way that I would explain young Earth creation is just, well, God made Adam a man. God did not make him an embryo or a baby. So why couldn't he make an Earth that was pre-aged a certain number of years? So I don't see,
yeah, I don't want to argue against
and
him
that's
in that
fine.
case.
I just don't see it as super relevant. But that's my full view on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's hard from your perspective to see why it's so relevant to me. But to me, it's really an example of like
Sure.
how far apart our metaphysical worldviews are. As it's like
No,
the world is so not 6,000 years old to me, and it's like
I
if
also
you think it is,
understand.
it's like yeah, you're gonna view a lot of things very
No,
differently from me.
I understand that it's not. I can say that it's not super relevant to me, but also understand that it's extremely relevant to you. I can totally
Yeah.
understand that.
Um. Uh. Yeah. So I think that there has to be some kind of compromise possible for these differing groups. And the compromise that I have come to that is, and here's I think the first signal that it's a great compromise. Everyone hates it. Everyone on both sides hates it, and that is a great signal that it's a great compromise. That neither side is happy with it because neither side really gets what they most want. As well, it doesn't truly violate anything that is a part of either of their ideologies. So the compromise is one, your social media, you're allowed to say whatever you want on your social media, but you cannot target members of the community with it. So if you want to say on your blog, I don't believe in gender, that's fair game. If a trans person in the community is talking about their gender transition and you go in to say this is an abomination, that's harassment. That crosses the line. I don't know that I would call it hateful. I think that getting stuck on hateful really makes people lose their minds a little. I don't think it matters whether it's hateful or not. I think that it reasonably makes the trans person feel like, okay, I don't really have like a space at this tournament. Like there's going to be people at these tournaments that are going to like pick me out online and really try to stick it to me. Now there's some future utopian world where I would hope it would be okay for these two groups to even have discourse against each other. So perhaps, I don't know yet, but perhaps one day if a trans person comments on some big public board and they share their experience, and then a Christian person responds with their disagreement, well, that was in some public, that might be okay. Um, but even then, a lot of it's going to have to get into targeting and so on. Um, so, so if you want to say on your own blog, on your own posts, in your own space, I believe X, Y, Z about gender. That is, it has to be okay for freedom of expression. If you are picking out particular people in the community and commenting on the validity of what they're doing, I think that qualifies as a type of harassment that extends, and then that extends into the building. So I think we kind of need two separate sets of rules. One for what are you allowed to say when you're not in the building of a Smash tournament, and what are you allowed to say when you're in the building of a Smash tournament.
Huh.
When it comes to being in the building of the Smash tournament, you're not obligated to use preferred pronouns if that violates your internal model of the other person. You're not obligated to profess any belief in what other people believe in.
Hmm.
But in the places where this gets tricky is obviously with the pronouns for the trans person. Um, the, uh, uh, the whole condition is about like this horrendous dysphoria that they get every time they imagine themselves as their defined their assigned gender at birth that they don't identify with, and you using he him for them. Not only does it make them feel bad, there's scientific evidence that this is not good for them, that having people around them that support them and aren't constantly causing them gender dysphoria is okay. Likewise, it's okay for me to say that when that on my own blog that when you die, nothing happens. There's no souls. I can deny the existence of souls, but if I'm playing against my opponent and I say, by the way, Jesus takes it up the butt, and I say some like stuff that they find super offensive, that's singling them out and bullying them for their metaphysical religious beliefs. That's not appropriate in the
Mm-hmm.
building. Um, uh, and hence, I am not obligated at any time to profess belief in Christianity. I can even, in the abstract, say maybe I don't believe in this stuff. Um, uh, so the compromise regarding pronouns is the gender neutral pronoun. Trans people don't like it because it does single them out. You're going, he did that, he did that, he did that, they did this, he did that. You are singling out the trans person. Doesn't feel good. Doesn't feel good for them. It does create some dysphoria. Yet you are also not stating something one way or the other. You are not professing belief one way or the other their about their gender or how you view their gender. They're implicitly you kind of are, but you aren't explicitly, which is the key.
Hmm.
And both sides hate this so much. They hate it
Right.
so much,
Hmm.
which I think is why it's the solution. Yeah,
Okay. Thank you for presenting that.
yeah.
You mentioned another question that was about how do we change the culture? Is that correct?
Oh, well, I almost had a few more things to say about the bounds there, even if
Okay.
you had any pushback.
No, I think, like I said in the beginning, I don't really know what the solution is. I'm glad that you shared
Okay.
yours.
Are you, I mean, that's the rule I'm proposing.
Hmm.
That's the rule I'm proposing. So are you willing to go by that rule?
I would have to give that some thought. I
Yeah.
I haven't really.
You think about it now for a sec. Think about it now for a second. Tell me your concerns, your unconcerns. Do not bring up anyone in particular,
Sure.
just feelings about what you like and don't like about the rule.
What I'll just say is you're probably right where you're not going to satisfy either side with that, and that's not to say that's not the correct way to go about it. That's all I've got so far on that.
Yeah. Do you think that it, okay. Um, do you think it qualifies? So one of the things I found when I talked to a rookie was it was like, try as I might, I tried to find all these different ways to get into. I was like, one of the routes I took was for the pronoun because the pronoun is at the core of it in
Yes.
terms of the conduct. That's the one where the person who doesn't believe in the trans stuff. That's what makes as an ideology it's really powerful because basically every time you refer to a person you're also talking about where you are ideologically so
Yeah.
you instantly single yourself out.
Right.
um uh, and try as I might, I could not get a rookie to bend on anything. I was like, well, have like, it's not unchristian to act. Like, okay, yeah, you shouldn't be like kissing people that aren't your wife, but like, well, but maybe you're acting in a movie where you're acting like a character and you do some things and you know underneath that that's okay and you can just act like it. You can
Hmm.
just be an actor. Acting and it's not lying.
That's interesting. I know some
uh
Christians that are very much against like any kind of romantic exchanges in acting, and so that's why they stop becoming actors and actresses.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So it turns out that this guy actually was like, no, I would never act ever in any case. And I tried a million different routes to get him to think maybe sometimes acting is okay. And he actually was quite resilient.
sounds like he stood up for what he believed in. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. Oh, I think there, the camera's better. Um, um, Someone says it's your choice whether or not you transition. If someone has a problem with it then that's their problem. I agree wholeheartedly with that. It is your decision whether you transition. um uh, I don't think someone saying on their blog that they don't believe that transition is real qualifies as them having a problem with it. I likewise don't believe that when you say Jesus Christ is my personal savior, your soul is suddenly transcended into some other thing. Like I don't believe so. I think as movements, the Christianity and the trans stuff has some stuff in common. You can be born again. You can. There's much of the we talked before about how you can escape the sins of your past by professing now you have belief in all this and I have changed and I have learned and I'm no longer ignorant. Uh, and I think that in some sense, functionally, a transition is quite like a conversion. I think that accepting Jesus as your personal savior is similar. So when someone is baptized, I don't believe that that did anything. I don't think that anything happened underneath that, and I'm free to think that. I don't have a problem with people being baptized, but I don't believe that it did anything.
Hmm.
Likewise, if a Christian thinks that that transition doesn't correspond to anything meaningful or true, that's not having a problem with it. That's just not believing in it. That's just not believing in it.
Hmm.
So Totally agreed when it comes to Christians going into the DMs of trans people and saying all sorts of crazy stuff about how they're going to burn in hell for the degeneracy, all that stuff. That's why I would call that harassment. But I think it's a real problem that all forms of disbelief are being like reframed as hate or having a problem with it or what have you, rather than what I see it as is another kind of atheism. And I'll stand up to the death for my right to be an atheist, to just not believe in something.
So, one thing on that is I do have some pretty formed opinions about whether you're direct messaging somebody, and it's like if any believing Christian direct messages an individual and makes a claim about their status of being saved, that is just like you can't do that because you can't know. And if you're a Christian that is worth their salt, you'll know that you can't do that. So you can go to a pastor and you could be wrong about whether or not they'll go to heaven and hell because you don't know. Ultimately, they know. So when it comes, and also goes back to just loving your neighbor and loving your enemy. So it doesn't really matter. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what you think about what that person believes about themselves. It doesn't matter about really anything. It doesn't matter. You treat them with dignity and respect, and as someone with God, bearing God's image, and ultimately that is what matters more paramount compared to any other label that they could associate themselves with.
I want to respond to something Poggy B said. They said, if you're calling someone's identity slash existence degeneracy, it's not a stretch to call that hateful IMO. If you're calling someone, as in I pick out a particular person and I say what you're doing is degeneracy, unprompted, I agree. I'm in total agreement. If I on my own blog say that XYZ I think is degenerate or immoral, I should be free to do that. That's not targeted. That's not targeted at someone. So the key I think here is the targeting.
Hmm.
Um,
Here's a
you should
question.
be able to abstractly say what you believe, but targeting is not okay.
Interesting. That's an interesting distinction. Farad asks, so one of the biggest issues with this topic is that the socially acceptable way to interact with trans individuals requires an imposition on every person. Um, Sort of like, I mean, like, I don't know that this is what Farad is saying, but like, let's say, for example, hey, when you come into Smash tournaments, when you walk in, you have to say Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior before you play the game. And I'm sure that's how some Christians see the imperative of trans individuals to say, hey, these are the set of pronouns you need to call me when you interact with me. So I think that's what Fraud's saying.
I think that said, he says it requires an imposition on every person. I do think that they are trans people are a large segment of the Malay community. They're a big constituency, and they do deserve special considerations. I think I don't think the imposition itself is the problem. I think that how we handle that imposition and what we ask of people, I think that there's a way to gracefully handle this imposition that's fair to everyone.
Tetros says a few times I've had to remind Christians of the way they ought to conduct themselves, especially after a man of God, and make others look bad. I'm atheist, but I don't stand for anyone acting immoral. That's interesting. There's a famous quote that says Christians are Jesus's best representation and also their worst representation, which is true. So obviously, and so here's another thing that's interesting. So my dad, he's a financial planner. He's a CFP in his practice, but on the side, he teaches apologetics for Christian apologetics, and he recently got his.
Sorry to interrupt. Your camera disappeared.
Oh, you know what? That's probably my camera. My camera burning out as we discussed. So I will turn that back on. Thank you for letting me know. One of the interesting things that he found was he did his doctorate of divinity. He did his dissertation on why Christians leave the church, and he found the number one reason for that. That's strange. Why is my camera coming on? Oh, I know why. There it is. Is because number one reason is folks were not allowed to question their beliefs. That's the number one reason. And the second reason was the hypocrisy found in the church. So obviously, a standard is set, as there should be, upon Christians to not only adhere to the teachings of Christianity, but like personify them, exemplify them. And when that standard is not measured up to, which it often is because every human is sinful, that is the moment where atheists or questioning believers can say, hey, I don't know about this Christianity thing. Look at all these horrible Christians. Well, that's sort of expected, right? Christians are people. So we're just as sinful as anyone else. So I want to just include that. So a genuine question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll read it.
Yeah, go for it.
Genuine question for the Enable Table. Does that make even hateful speech okay in your eyes as long as it's non-specific, generalized, stereotyped? Yeah, that's a really great question. So I have a personal view, and then I have a more practical view. So in terms of practicality, I can understand that maybe society isn't ready to be totally accepting of everyone. Um, and so hate, I understand if it's like hate, like if you're expressing like when I see trans people, I just want to kill them or something. I can understand that uh crossing some kind of line where you might need to be careful in public because that will affect the trans people and the other people might if it corresponds with violence, it gets a lot trickier, like genuine violence. That said, honestly, no, I think it's a problem with society is that we don't have adequate ways to express hateful feelings. Hateful feelings are normal and it should be acceptable to express your feelings. Um, it should not be at a tournament. So no, not at a tournament. But this is one of the great contradictions I think in some of the modern movements. I'm a feminist. Feminists under in feminist theory, we live in a patriarchy in which everyone has internalized misogyny against women. But in the current political climate, we're supposed to accept one. We all kind of hate women, but you cannot say that you do. It's very bizarre. There's no clear way to say to like express any experience. Hate comes from personal experience. If you have personal experiences with a certain group or type of person, there is a I don't think it's healthy or good to repress it. And I don't think we should be encouraging total emotional suppression. As for how do we legislate genuine expressions of hate, I think that's very tricky. I don't think mere descriptive. I think that that's a tricky conversation worthy of being had. I don't think that's actually the conversation that's being had here, because much of what we're talking about isn't really about hate. It's about perceptual, like your perception of the world. So I think there is a conversation to be had. What do you do about genuine hate? The problem I have is that descriptive beliefs about the world are being redefined as hateful beliefs
Yes.
towards others.
Well said.
So it's a different question, uh, but worthy of conversation too. What do you do about genuine hate, and is there a place for expressing it?
Keswick IRL, I want to respond to this question. In regards to what Mr. Kimball said about loving the enemy, I feel that a problem has been coming up in the Melee community is that individuals who claim that they are ostracized for being Christian are viewing everyone who is ostracizing them as the enemy, and that is therefore the issue at the core. And I agree.
The most Christian thing ever.
Well,
After reading the Bible, that's the most Christian
oh
thing
no,
ever.
I could not disagree more. I could not disagree more. Those ostracized. I guess it depends on what you mean by the enemy, because I would say the ultimate enemy is actually Satan and sin and demonic forces, and Satan and demonic forces can certainly influence human individuals and have them act in certain ways. And they're an enemy in a certain sense, but they're not the true enemy. And when the Bible says love your enemies, they're talking about people like that, your adversaries. And so if someone who disagrees with me, even someone who wants to take me down and my family, I still love that person. And although they are the enemy, they are not deserved of my hatred. Satan and pure evil is worthy of my hatred. So I want to make that clear as well.
When I say that's the most Christian thing ever, all I mean is that they've. I think I think that there is a persecution involved in being a Christian in a world that's against you. I think that that's like part of the Christian story.
Yes.
It's part of a lot of stories. It's also part of the Jewish story for
Right.
sure too.
Yeah. Sort of
Um,
being persecuted for beliefs you have isn't uniquely Christian, but Bible does talk a lot
it
about being
is it
persecuted for
is yeah
beliefs.
very Christian though. Yeah, it's
Yes,
not
it is.
uniquely Christian, but it is
Exactly.
definitely like a
I
Christian thing. So I
I would
think
agree. Yeah.
Christians are going to feel a little persecuted, and they're going to be like, all right, I have all this framework for hell yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm like totally like
Yeah.
I know how to handle being persecuted.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
And you stand up for myself. I'm not going to shut up. I'm going to say what I think and feel.
Drew, in the interest of
Uh,
time, we've got 10 minutes left. Is there
okay.
anything you
Yeah.
want to close with?
Yes, there is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, I think that the way forward has a few avenues. One is to continually have conversations in public about these things. It has to be in public. There have to be public conversations so people can see that it is possible to discuss these things without freaking out, that there are other ways. A lot of people act like, well, what else are we supposed to do when people say stuff we don't disagree with? When people say stuff we disagree with, we have to shut down hate where we see it. And we don't have to, like, by shut down, we don't need to scream at everyone every time we think what they're saying is hateful. Even if it genuinely is hateful, it probably is not very effective, especially if lots of people believe that thing. It's not strategically effective, nor does it morally really make much sense. It's probably like a big rationalization for people to have a good reason to just also be really angry and use their worst impulses. So one, continued. My answers are going to be all liberal in nature. So continued discourse about these things, I think, is part of the cure. We have to keep talking about it. Um, Two, there's a lot of room for protesting tournaments. So a lot of people feel like there's nothing they can do. That's not true. If 10 people were dead set, they could show up to a tournament, and I mean, political protest, peaceful protest is it's just unbelievably effective when done. Like it's just unbelievable how effective, like incredibly obnoxious peaceful protest can be. Um yes, you can be totally basically shut down on Twitter. You can't in physical space. Um if you show up to a tournament with signs and stickers and God forbid you chain yourself to setup so they can't kick you out. Um, there's a lot of avenues going forward in terms of protest. Lastly, yeah, we didn't really get to discuss this very much. I think some of this actually would qualify as one reason I'm advocating for these things for the Christians is that I want to give a framework by which they can discuss their views so that they don't violate any of the principles of the other side. And hence, when they are discriminated against, it is evidently religious discrimination. A lot of it is like they're going to say anything you do is hateful. And so you really have to, like, you have to be very polished in how you describe your views. And if you are totally unimpeachable and you get banned, there is probably legal recourse because these are private corporations. They can't. You have legal rights. This movement with like the mech stuff, like they're illegally recording people. You have a right to privacy. They can't secretly record you if, well, depending on what state you live in. He lived in Illinois. I live in California. You can't be secretly recorded and then have those recordings used to defame you. That's illegal. We have rights, and I think we should stand up for our rights. Um, uh, you have a right to not be persecuted against your religion. And so if you're careful enough that you manage to actually phrase this properly, like a lot of the people, they get shot down because there's this intersection of like some of them are phrasing it in their religious stuff, but then they're getting caught saying stuff that can be gouged, it's like pushed as harassment. If you're careful enough, they'll end up banning you for your religious beliefs, and you can win a lawsuit against them and really change things. So the way forward, I think, is that well, they are. People want to say that like melee is not a right. We do have rights in the United States. We do have them as much as they wish that we didn't. We actually have like unironic rights. And you can't just discriminate against people on the basis of their religion, their race, their sex. Um, and I think that there are legalistic approaches available. So we didn't get to talk much about that, but one of the goals that I have is to really help the Christians figure out a model of rhetoric that makes them unimpeachable in this sense and really boils it down to that metaphysical religious difference. I think that that's the future to get back into
Okay.
the community. Yeah.
Cool. Well, again, thank you, Drew, for your time and just for sharing your thoughts. There are certainly things you shared that, I don't necessarily see the eye to eye with. I'm sure there's plenty that I said where you go, that came out of Wackoville. But at the same time, I'm just happy that we were able to discuss all these things and hopefully it leads to more conversations. And if how do I say this? I would just ask if people continue to have conversations like this, that grace is extended to either side. We're all trying to figure out a constructive way to go about our lives. If you have good faith discussions like this, you're doing your best, and you're not trying to do anything nefarious. You're not trying to do anything negative. So I would say come in with that charitable opinion and understand that you are opening yourself up to risk, and not everyone has to or needs to. But for those that are interested, certainly I think it's fair to say, speak on Drew's behalf. You can chat with Drew, or you can chat with me if you'd like, and just share your perspective. If you feel more comfortable from a liberal perspective, maybe talk to Drew. If you want something more from a more libertarian Christian perspective, you can ask me.
Yeah, I wanted to add Poggy B, who gave me a big kind of response. I want to extend an invitation, Poggy. If you want to talk, you can reach out to me. I would recommend DMing me at the Unable Table on Twitter, or I'm also the Unable Table on Discord. You can add me. I'll talk to you. It can be in private. I've been having a lot of these conversations, like I mentioned, with left-leaning people in private because they're scared of talking in public. Or I shouldn't even say scared. That makes it sound unfair. But if you're not comfortable talking in public, we can talk private, off the record. You don't have to worry about me recording you illegally. And I would love to talk about all this stuff with you too, extend you the same, hear your perspective, and
Cool.
so on.
Fraud says, thank you, Drew, for coming out and having this discussion. I feel like there's a lot of pushback from people with slight differences from the orthodoxy rather than larger ones. I totally agree. Darbley says, happy to hear the discourse and discussion ultimately leading to all parties becoming better than they were. You guys are valid. I enjoyed the stream. Thank you also, Chillax, for the follow. I did not want to ignore that. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so I'm going to close things up here. You guys can follow Drew.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
And also, maybe we'll talk in the future. I did enjoy just the general religious talk.
Cool.
I'd be down to discuss scripture more at some point, to finish John, maybe.
Cool. Great. Yeah, the Unable Table. Give him a follow on Twitter. You can follow him. I noticed he had Twitch, so I just tagged you. I don't know if you ever stream on Twitch or anything.
No, I think the platform is abusive. If I stream, it's gonna be on YouTube.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Morals, yeah.
That's I got a discussion for another time. All right, cool. All right. Thanks everyone. I'm gonna sign things off with Drew, and I'll kind of go back to my main screen. Thanks so much, Drew. Appreciate it, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay, well that was your discussion. I'm gonna try to turn on my other webcam. Is it gonna work? There it is. Okay. You guys, thank you so much. I know this is a bit different than how most streams are, but I appreciate everyone for coming out. I know hopefully there's some folks that are lurking that didn't feel comfortable enough to actually participate, get their username on screen for such a controversial stream, but hopefully you got something out of it. Just considering other viewpoints or kind of refining what you think yourself. Again, if you have more questions about this, you want to talk more, my DMs are open, as are Drew's. And yeah, I seriously appreciate everyone's time, and especially to Drew for making all the time to chat with me today. With that, maybe we'll find someone to raid. Let's see who's live right now. Modbot got you. Yeah, there was actually a really funny comment earlier. I'm trying to think of whose comment it was. Okay, it was Kessig that said, if someone comes out and says, I hate women or I hate Jews, then we as a Melee community should have a discussion. And that comment, I had to, in order to admit that comment, I had to add permitted terms for those two phrases because Automod blocked it, and I felt really weird adding those. But yeah, I thought that was super funny. Okay, so let's find someone to raid. Let's raid Garrett Williamson. Garrett's awesome. You guys will love him if you don't know him. He's currently playing Mario Kart Double Dash. Please say hi to him for me, and I'll see you guys on the next stream. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.